everybody, and welcome. This is Excel Level 2, a video recorded session. My name is Bethany, and I'm a training officer for HCD. Just as a disclaimer, this was recorded as of September 2022, so depending on when you're watching, how you're watching, the software could have made some updates already, so conceptually everything will remain the same. However, the button themselves, they could look a little different. They might be located in a different area, but that doesn't mean you can't move along. So before we begin, I just want to make sure you are set up for success in this recorded session. Just some tips that I have for you, and this is feedback from live sessions. If possible, you want to have a two-screen setup. That is so that on one of them you'll be able to watch, and then the other one you'll be able to simultaneously follow along. The secondary tip that I have for you is that there are plenty of exercise files for this specific session. So you want to make sure you download them in advance. It'll just help you to keep a smooth sailing course. So where to find those if you're unsure, just in case, you want to make sure you go to HCD Learns, our learning management system, and it should look like this as soon as you're logged in. At the very top where you can search the catalog, we're just going to search for the word Excel, and anything related to that will appear. Specifically, the one we're aiming for is a video option, so this is probably how you found the course, but otherwise this is titled Video Training Excel Level 2. Go and click there. When the page refreshes, of course, you'll see the details, you can launch, etc. However, in this Show More, it's quite hidden, but through the resources, here are the list of exercise files in addition to the class handout. This I would recommend if you can or need to, you can save that for sure. It's a PDF. It goes step by step of everything that we'll be doing together. So just something to keep in mind. Just for reference, I'm going to go and click on this first one labeled 1A through 1D. It's our first exercise workbook. When I click on it, it will appear in my downloads folders. If I go to my top right and actually open the file, this is in essence what it looked like. It's basically an Excel workbook, of course. However, one thing that I'll point out is you're probably going to observe that there's this yellow banner. This is because for security measures, so all you want to do is click this enable editing button. When you do that, you are able to make change to your actual sheet. And I would suggest at this point do a file save as so that you again have it accessible on your local laptop. So again, how we got here was through our HCD Learns profile. We searched Excel Level 2, found the video option specifically, and clicked on the Show More options, which gave us this view to see all the resources. We just checked out how Excel, the first Excel workbook appears. So just for reference, the class handout, as I mentioned, is a PDF. Just to double click it and check on it, as you can see, my page refreshed, and here it is. It is a PDF, and it goes through everything that we'll go through. So feel free to follow along using that as well. I will just take this back. So again, to share with you where we found it, take some time to pause the video, save each exercise file and the class handout, and by the end, your folder or wherever you're storing it will eventually look like this. And in this case, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 total Excel workbooks that you'll have as far as their different exercises. And the last one would be your class handout, specifically a PDF so you can follow along. All right, so I'll give you some time now. Go and pause your video, and that way you could save everything and we'll move forward from there. All right, I take it you've had a chance to successfully download all the exercise files in the class handout, so that is checked off on number 2. I do encourage, because this is a video, you are at your own pace. Please do take several breaks, pause, and take your breaks as you need. Especially with Excel, certain parts could make and break your day. I totally understand. Do what you got to do. But the last part, as I mentioned, this is Excel. It could be a little picky. Practice makes perfect, so no matter what, do enjoy yourself and have a lot of fun. Thanks for hanging out with me, so let's get started. Officially, again, welcome to our video recorded session of Excel Level 2. You're probably wondering what this is all about, so let's check out what's in store. What Excel Level 2 is, it's a build out, of course, of Level 1, where you are building upon those skills that you gained in the first session of Level 1. And really what that translates to is instead of working from one particular worksheet, in Level 2, we start going three-dimensional. What I mean by that is, yes, we'll play around with some formulas and functions, but this time work across different sheets. And possibly, usually in Level 3, we start working across multiple workbooks. But the emphasis for Level 2 primarily is we start sharing our story. We have all this data, but we now need to figure out how to share that story through hopefully some sort of visual representation, such as a graph. So if you follow along with me, this is our roadmap. Our specific course objectives is by the end of the course, you'll feel a lot more comfortable performing advanced calculations. For example, we will be working with cell name ranges, multiple in facts, and you'll be do calculations across multiple worksheets. From there, we're going to gain more traction and at the end feel more comfortable with advanced formulas and functions. For example, if functions, VLOOKUP, and so forth. After that, again, at the end, I feel confident that you will have a good understanding of how to create a visualization of the data that you now have, specifically by creating some basic charts. We'll be playing with all types of charts there. Part of charts, there's also what's called pivot tables, where you might also want to create pivot charts. And again, these will go hand in hand. So by the end, I think you'll have a much more better comprehensive view of how this all works together. And as I mentioned, the emphasis in Level 2 is all about sharing that story. So in terms of presenting your story, we're going to leave off with Module 5, in which we go over the do's and the don'ts of presentation features. And my last part, which is not part of this video recorded session, it is in the handout. Take a look at it. It will go over even more methods of how you can truly customize your Excel environment. That way you're a little bit more proficient and comfortable in your own workspace. So if that sounds good, let's go ahead and move forward. We will now begin the very first module in which we will start working with advanced calculations. Specifically, what we'll cover is what's called naming a cell range. From there, we might have multiple cell ranges, and then we might even need to change up the names. But as we do that, let's see if we can calculate very specific functions using those name cell ranges. And from there, again, calculate that data across the different sheets, aka 3D style. So the way this is set up is that the exercise files are consistent with the exercise number. So for example, when we're on 1A, we'll be on sheet or workbook 1A, and in this case, it will cover us all the way through 1D. So for example, if you had successfully downloaded this, in this very first module, we have two workbooks. The first one that we'll use is labeled 1A through 1D, and as we get towards the very end, we'll go through 1E. So once you're ready, what we want to do is double click and open up our first workbook titled 1A through 1D. When you open it, it will look like this, in which it is one entire workbook with multiple sheets at the very bottom. The one we want to start with specifically will be our sales data tab, where you see this purple contracting associates banner. All right, so I take it you've got your exercise workbook 1A, 1D opened up. So just to make sure this is visually easier for all types of learning types, especially for those visually. On my left, I have the exact class handout, so you could see the exact steps that I'll be taking. And then on my right, I do have the Excel workbook open, so again, you could see what's happening at the same time. So for this particular exercise, we're going to start out with 1A, in which we name a cell range. Reasons why you'd want to do this is for every cell, it has a name, such as where I clicked on as B13, over here, this is D13, and so forth. But sometimes you might work with a range, more than one cell. And that range, rather than calling, say it like B1, so if I selected all of this, anytime you select a range, it's always named with the first cell where it started from. So in this case, C4. And I know that because at the top left, you have what's called the name box. And again, I started at C4. Well, C4 is kind of boring, and you might want to, again, update that entire range to a very specific names, especially when you start working across multiple worksheets. So to rename a range, what we're going to do is we're going to select cells B5 through B10. So you're going to click, hold down, as in Q1, B5 through B10, the performance of each contracting associates for every country. When you do that, we're going to go to the top left corner in that name box where, because we start at B5, technically it's identified as B5. Well, I'm not happy with that, so we're going to rename that. So in this name box, simply click in there. You want to delete using backspace or delete key, the B5, and we're going to give it a new name, specifically quarter spelled out, so QUARTER_1. So I'm going to type that out, and that is quarter_1 in the name box. Now remember, this is Excel, so for the data to be taken and update, just go ahead and hit your enter key and Excel will be happy. So if you want to verify that that change actually occurred, that you successfully named as a cell range, you just want to click anywhere outside of that. So I'm just clicking a random cell. And at the top left corner, I'm going back to the name box. I'm going to use this arrow pointing down, and I should see that there's another cell name range by the name of what we just typed, which is quarter_1. In fact, if you click that cell name range, you will see the exact range that is being selected, which in this case is correct because we wanted cells B5 through B10, so basically from Mexico to Italy. And that, my friends, is exercise 1A. Now, because when you're looking at this workbook, there are plenty of quarters that we might want to update the names. Sure, we could go and do this again for Q2, Q3, Q4, but let's not work harder, let's work smarter. There's another way to do so, and all in one shot. So that leads me to exercise 1B, in which we will name multiple cell ranges all at once. So staying on the same exact workbook and the same exact sheet called sales data, this time we're going to select from C4 all the way through E10. So C4 all the way through E10. So it's not inclusive of just the sales performance, but also the labels of Q2, Q3, Q4. And at this point, what we want to do is name all these ranges, and there's multiple of them, but hopefully all at once. So to do so, you're going to go up to the top where you have the Formulas tab. Once you click on the Formulas tab, usually towards the center of your ribbon, there's what's called a Defined Names group. So we're looking for that Defined Names group. Once you find that group, in that same group, you're going to find a button called Create from Selection, and it looks like this. And I say this in all my classes, but hover to discover. So the Create from Selection, if you actually read the text, it says automatically generate names from the selected cells. And I don't know about you, but automatically sounds good to me. So we're going to go ahead and check that out by clicking on this Create from Selection button. And what will happen is you're going to get this dialog window titled Create Names from Selection. And it is a floating window. So we've seen this in Excel level 1, but what that means is you can click the title of the window and just move it around. For example, mine appeared way on the right side. I'm just going to move it here so visually it's there. And the question is, where do you want to create the names based on where the values are located? Is it going to be in the top row, which is the default selection? So that means where Q2, Q3, Q4 are listed. Sometimes you may have the left column, such as this side, to be your labels, bottom row or right column. It just depends. In this particular example, we're going to use the top headers here, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. So we do indeed want that top row. Once you have it and confirm that it's selected, go and click OK. And clicking OK closes out the window for you, but at the same time, it also updates the entire multiple ranges all at once. And to triple check, right, if Excel really did the work, we're going to go back to the name box at the top left. And if you pull the arrow down to review all the different cell name ranges, here they are. You have quarter 2. Notice it's already underscored, quarter 3 and quarter 4. The underscore is because in this particular value, quarter space 2, the space is replaced with the underscore. Things you should know about when you're naming a cell range: it cannot be the same name of an actual cell. So for example, we can't just say A1 because there's a cell A1. Or if we want to get really fancy, there's like XYZ. There is an actual column and cell labeled XYZ, so we cannot just leave the name boxes as is. So just something to consider when you are naming your cell ranges. So otherwise, if that successfully worked for you, that's perfect, because that concludes exercise 1B, in which we were able to name multiple cell ranges all at once and primarily through the create from selection option. Where this takes us, we're going to move into exercise 1C, where sometimes just because you titled it, say, quarter, fully spelled out underscore 1, this is not locked in forever. You're absolutely allowed to edit the names as needed. So let's say, hypothetically, you're sharing the sheet with another peer, and they think quarter fully spelled out is just too much. If we can abbreviate, they'll be a little bit more happy. So what they mean by, instead of spelling out the word quarter, we want to abbreviate to, say, QTR. For whatever reason, okay? So in order to edit the cell ranges, and there's multiple ways you could do this, but one of the easier ones is, again, we're staying on the same sheet, same specific sales data tab, just for everybody's reference. And in this case, although yours might be still selected, that's fine as far as the range, but we're gonna go right back up to this top, click on the Formulas tab, and we're gonna go back to that Define Names group. Instead of the create from selection, we have what's called on the left the name manager. So you want to click the name manager button, and as you can see, what it does, it creates, edits, and deletes and finds all the names used in the entire workbook. And notice the names basically are substitutes for cell references. So I'm going to click on the name manager button. That go ahead and opens up our floating window as we've seen all along. So I'm just going to move it here. And at this time, because this is the name manager dialog box, we see every single cell name range. And here we are with quarter 1 through 4. In order to edit it, what you want to do is click on the appropriate cell name range. So we're going to start off, for example, with this quarter underscore 1. When you click on it, it should be in blue. That's Excel's way of knowing it's selected. And there's going to be a couple options. You can either create a new cell name range, or you can edit or even delete. In this case, we simply want to edit the name, so we're going to click the Edit button. When you do that, the box alone will update to the Edit Name dialog box. And in the name field, this is where you can make the changes. So instead of quarter spelled out, we're going to delete that. And we're going to put quarter as in capital QTR. Spelling doesn't really matter, so if it's capitalized or not, there's not really a difference. Excel will just recognize that it's QTR at the end of the day. So at this point, we want to rename the entire cell name range to QTR underscore 1. Notice the range area refers to still the appropriate places. In this case, it's B5 through B10, which is correct. And once you're happy with it, we're going to click OK. Once you do that, in the name manager box, notice the change you make appears. So it is now, instead of fully spelled out, abbreviated to QTR underscore 1. Again, this is all for practice. We're learning, so we're not done there. We are going to do the same behaviors with quarter two, quarter three, quarter four. So go and click on where it says quarter two. You're going to hit the edit button, change that up to QTR2 underscore 2. And once you're ready, click OK, and you should see again the updated name. Once you do that successfully, move on to quarter three. So I'm selecting quarter three. We're going to edit the name field again into QTR underscore 3. And notice your reference is still exactly correct. And we're happy that, so I'm going to click on OK, and we're going to do this one final time with quarter underscore 4. We're going to use the edit button, and in that name field, update it to QTR underscore 4. If you needed to truly add comments, maybe you're sharing the workbook or whatnot, you can absolutely do that with cell name ranges. At this point, we're just going to skip it because we're happy with it, and you can click on OK. So at this time, what just happened is we successfully updated our cell name ranges by the abbreviations. And when you're done, you can either use the close button or the X, either or will close out the window. And if you're really unsure if Excel did the work, we're going to go up to the top left corner, check out that name box, and check out if those changes actually took place. And as you can see on my top left, I do have QTR underscore 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you select, again, a very specific range, it will still select the area for you. So super happy, and hopefully that works. At this point, that concludes exercise 1C, in which we've successfully edited the cell name ranges to something else. We went from a full-on name of quarter to something more abbreviated, such as QTR. All right, good news. So that takes us next into the next exercise of 1D, in which we are going to calculate functions on the multiple ranges that we just created in this particular worksheet. So again, stick here on the same workbook that we've been playing all along, and specifically the sales data tab. Where all this comes to play is we're going to use these cell name ranges into a formula, and let's say we want to reference again the actual cell name ranges rather than just the range alone. So to do that, we're going to click on cell B13, as in Bravo 13, so right next to the quarter sales total. We're going to click here in cell B13. That is where we want our total for our function to occur, so that's why we clicked on cell B13. Because we're going to begin a formula, you always start that off with an equal sign, so whether you type in the box itself or in the formula bar at the top, either or will work. I am personally in the cells, I hit the equal sign, and we just want a total. So the definition or the formula for that is sum, S-U-M. So I'm typing equal sign sum, S-U-M, and go ahead and hit your tab key, tab. What that does, it allows us to build out the argument at this time. So Excel is now ready to figure out where are we pulling from. And specifically, since we already named a range of cells, if we just go ahead and type in the letter Q on our keyboard, it will automatically appear here. So I have quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Notice still abbreviated. So at this time, you want to double click on the QTR underscore 1 to select the range. And notice in my formula bar, I still have the equal sum, but now it's referencing that cell name range, which technically is cells B5 through B10. And because we want all of the total for quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're going to continue adding to the formula. And to do so, all you want to do is go and type a colon. So that is your shift, semicolon, or else the two dots, or as if you're doing time. And when you do a colon, what that means, it's a range, it's through. And specifically, we want quarter 1 through quarter 4. So guess what? We're going to type in our keyboard just the letter Q, as in queen, and we want to find quarter 4. So when you double click quarter 4, notice in my formula bar I have equal sum. Quarter 1 is the cell name range, but through, so it's going to grab quarter 2, quarter 3, all the way up to quarter 4. And that's why you can see the first name cell range is in blue. The through, which is the end area, is in red, specifically when I look at it visually. So once you're ready, because this is our formula, that's all we're looking for, the sum for quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4, but referencing the name ranges. Once you're ready, go and hit enter, and your grand total for your quarter sales total in cell B13 should read $6,845,000. Okay, and if you click cell B13, you will see in your formula bar that exact formula. It is the sum of quarter 1 through quarter 4 based on the cell name range. Woohoo! So hopefully you got that. The next part is, what if instead of all the quarters, we want a very specific sum for very specific countries? And in this case, maybe we want just North American sales. So when we say North American, we're talking Mexico, as in row 5, United States, row 6, and possibly, if I know my geography, Canada, as in row 8. So we're going to figure that out, and we're going to start that off primarily in cell B16. So go and click on cell B16, and this is where we're going to begin the formula. We're going to do this very similar to what we just did, but we're going to go with very specific country data. So this time, here's what you're going to do. Go and type in, start your formula through an equal sign, and then you're going to type in sum, S-U-M, tab, to build out again your formula. And in this case, because we want Mexico, United States, and Canada, specifically, I'm going to select that area, that range, rather than typing out. That is a possibility too, but I'm a horrible typer. So here we go. I'm going to select from B5 all the way through E6. And that is because I have Mexico through the United States data for quarter 1 through quarter 4. When I'm happy with that, okay, what we want to do is then put a comma. So you're going to type a comma into your formula. And this time we want to grab the data for Canada because it's also part of the North American area. So when you're ready, go and click on Canada's data, meaning cells B8 all the way through E8. And this is where it's a good idea to triple check your formula. At the top, I can see it's equal sum, so the total of B5 through E6, which is indeed Mexico and United States quarterly performance. And then we also have Canada, which is separated by a comma, B8 all the way through E8, and that is correct. Just to share another way that you could see this, and sometimes it gets a little challenging, you also have this FX key at the top left in your very near your formula bar. If you click there, that still builds out this function arguments window. So that whole comma separator, if you are not comfortable with that, this is something I personally suggest. When you click there, you're building out each argument. So the first one is, this is a sum, first off. So I want the first range, which is, again, B5 all the way to E6 is correct. And then I also have the secondary argument, which is the other country, in this case Canada. So it's telling you a preview of those values already. And notice I get a total preview at the bottom, which will yield exactly what I'm aiming for. So once you're ready, this is when you click OK, this is the equivalent of hitting enter on your keyboard. So I'm going to click on OK, and dun, 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 for the North American sales, based on Mexico, United States, and Canada's performance, you should have $4,895,000. Woo-woo! I'm just asking for 2%. That's all I'm saying. So if that worked for you, fantastic job. You are currently successfully calculating functions on multiple ranges. Now here's the thing, we are not done, folks. We are going to absolutely calculate a little bit more for more practice. But this time we're going to grab the other countries and we're going to call it the European sales. So to grab that data, go ahead and scroll down just a tad bit, or in mine I kind of viewed in. So you want to go ahead and click specifically on cell B19, Bravo 19, and this is where we're going to begin our formula for all the other countries, which are England, no, I'm sorry, not Canada, but England, Switzerland, and Italy. I clearly don't know my geography. So click on cell B19. We're going to begin that formula with an equal sign. And this is where you get to pick. Are you going to use that function arguments window, or you can type it out? You're the boss, you decide. So I'm personally going to hit equal sign. I'm going to type in sum tab to build out my argument. And then I'm just going to select the ranges. So in this case specifically, I'm going to go with cells B7, which is England, all the way through E7, because it's England's quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4 performance. Once I'm ready with that, I'm going to separate this argument with a comma, so I'm hitting a comma on my keyboard, and I'm going to grab the data for the other countries, which is Switzerland and Italy. And that begins at cell B9 all the way through cell E10. And again, notice my colors. If I'm looking at my formula in the box itself or I'm in the formula bar, they should match. At this time, I want England's data, Switzerland, and Italy. So when you're ready, go and hit that lovely enter key, and you should yield your grand total, the sum for the European sales, which equates to $1,950,000. And hopefully my answer is indeed correct according to the class book. So here we go. And at this point, what we did, folks, is we took quarterly sales, which have cell name ranges. We were able to find out quickly the total by selecting the cell name ranges, but we also then broke that up a little bit and found very specific regional sales performance by still selecting very select data. So at this point, again, we're not just adding cell by cell, we are grabbing a range of cells, which is the concept behind this particular exercise of exercise 1D. You have to be very proud of yourself making this happen. So thank you, Excel, for working with us. And we're going to keep moving this forward. So instead of just working on this particular sheet with just these cell ranges, we are now going to build upon that, but specifically across now multiple sheets. So this takes us to exercise 1E, and yes, it's going to be slightly cut off, so my apologies. However, in exercise 1E, we are going to calculate that data, but this time across the multiple sheets, again, 3D style. So once you're done with the previous exercise, you're welcome to close it out. So I'm using this X. You can save it, you can trash it, it's up to you. I will personally not save it, but we are going to use a different exercise workbook. You want to go and open up exercise 1E Excel level 2, which basically is the yearly sales. So when you're ready, go and double click that. It should open up, and when you do that, let me just zoom in here a little bit so it looks a little bit visually better for all of us. In this particular workbook, this is sales performance across multiple years. So we have 4 tabs at the bottom: 2016 performance, 2017, 2018, and the year summary, which is actually blank. Okay. And so to start things off, again, just be sure you're in this particular workbook. And where we're going to actually start our calculations is going to go to that blank one, which is the year summary. So go and click on the year summary tab, and it should look very similar to this, where you have every single month for the specific areas such as north, south, east, and west. And we are tasked to figure out the exact totals across these last 3 years and put them in this particular worksheet. So to start things off, we're going to select and click on cell B6. Bravo 6, that's specifically for the north area in January. Because we're going to begin a formula, okay, here's what I want you to do. We're just finding something simple such as a sum, so similar to what we've been doing all along. We're going to start that off with an equal sign, type in sum, S-U-M, tab. So equal sign, sum, S-U-M, tab. We are now ready to begin building out our arguments. And that again is all we want to do is find out the performance in January in 2016, 2017, 2018 and total it up so we could put it on the sheet for just the north area. So to do so, you're going to join me, click at the bottom here for 2016 tab. Notice in your formula bar, it does change. It suddenly has a single quote with 2016. What that means is just it's pulling from a 2016 tab. It's labeling the exact tab exactly how it is, which in this case is 2016. So once you're ready, we want, again, the north area for January, which is cell B6. So I'm going to click on cell B6. And once I click on it, and this is specifically the 2016 sheet, again, pay attention to your formula bar. Whenever you have a exclamation point, that means it's just pulling from that particular sheet at all times and this specific cell. So we're talking B6 in the 2016 year. And at this point, because we want technically 2017, 2018, we're going to grab a range, but this time across the multiple workbooks. So here's the catch. To do so, you want to hold down your Shift key on your keyboard now. And when you hold down Shift, that means you're holding and grabbing for a range, but everything in the middle is going to be selected as part of that. So specifically, as you hold down your Shift key, go ahead and click on the 2018 tab. Notice all of a sudden all of my tabs are a highlighted lighter, like whitish color. That's indicating that I grabbed the 2016, 2017, and 2018 sheets. And for additional reference, when you look at your formula bar, you have again the single quotes 2016, so it's starting there. Notice there's a colon, which means through, it's a range, through 2018, again still in a single quote because it's pulling from this specific tab. And regardless of which tab, which is explained through the exclamation point in the formula bar, we are only pulling the cell B6 in every specific worksheet. So once you're ready, if you did that right and your formula bar reflects that, you should be able to hit your Enter key to close out your argument. And here we go. Notice automatically I'm in my year summary tab. And in the north area for January, all in for 2016, 2017, 2018, we produced approximately 125,000. Notice it's not exactly formatted with a comma or anything, but it's 125,000 in my value. So if that worked for you, wonderful. And now you're tasked to pull for north, south, east, west for January all the way to December. And if I'm doing that right, that's like 48 cells. That's a lot of work in my opinion. So guess what? Excel has ways to help you. And we're specifically on step number 9 where you can use what's called autofill. And I personally love autofill because it's going to do a lot of legwork for you. So autofill can work horizontally or vertically. So what I mean by that is we're going to pull across, meaning north, south, east, west. I'm going to first click on cell B6 in this year summary tab. We're going to hover into the bottom right corner of the cell until your mouse or trackpad has a plus sign that's filled in. That indicates it's ready for autofill. When you see that, go ahead and click, drag, and pull right till you get to the west side. That's right, we represent on the west side, California State, right? Just kidding. So otherwise, notice I pulled from north, south, east, west for the January time frame by autofilling. And the values you should have received are 205,000, 115,000 in the east, and then the west, 135,000. To demonstrate that autofill also works vertically, go ahead and click on cell B6. We're going to make sure that autofill bottom right corner of the cell turns into a filled out plus sign like this, and you're going to pull all the way down through row 19. So here we go. And I have a concept that I like to share with you. It's called the friendly neighbors. So instead of clicking, dragging, pulling down, right, that's a potential for manual error, You can also double click when you're ready to autofill, and because this concept, which is called friendly neighbor concept, as Excel likes its friends, its buddies in the cells next to them. So it's going to stop whenever that cell is no longer filled in if there's no data in there. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to click on cell C6, so the South January timeframe. And I'm going to wait till my autofill is ready. I'm going to double click and we're going to see it's going to land and stop at row 19. Dun, 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 and it happened faster than I could sing it, but there you go. And you could try that out yourself. So if you prefer clicking, dragging, and pulling, totally your call. It is really up to you, and I am just going to double click to make that happen. And at this point, your goal is to fully, successfully autofill or fill out this entire workbook so that you have the total year summary sales all the way for north, south, east, west from the time frame of January through December, inclusive of row 19, the total sales. Now, if you're truly attentive to detail, clearly in row 18, we don't want zeros. That doesn't indicate anything for us. So you're more than welcome to select row 18. I'm going to either right click or you can hit your delete button on your keyboard. And personally, I will use clear contents so it's very evident, very clear about the totals, not only for the specific months, for the specific regions, but definitely at the very bottom, the grand total. And that, folks, is specifically calculating data across multiple sheets and concluding exercise 1E. Once you're all done, now that we've concluded that exercise, you're more than welcome to close out the workbook. Again, with the X, you can either save or don't save, but I do want to take a moment and debrief what exactly did we just do. Whoop, there we go. So here we go. Just to recap what we did in Module 1, this had to do with performing advanced calculations. Our goal was to understand how to name very specific cell ranges, and we did that several times to the full-on spell out of quarter 1, for example, and we even learned to abbreviate that. So we did multiple cell ranges and fully edited them to have a abbreviated version. But that last part is where we took the specific cell name ranges and this time used them as references when we made calculations, not just in a single sheet, but definitely across multiple worksheets. And so, great job, folks. If you're hanging with me, that concludes the first module of performing advanced calculations. We will then move forward in specifically the second module where we start building upon formulas and functions. Specifically, what we're going to play with is if functions, VLOOKUP, and database functions, where we'll be spending our time for the most of the time in the function library group. For this particular module, just to set you up for success, there's only one workbook labeled 2A through 2C, otherwise customer orders. That is the workbook that we'll be using. So you want to take a moment, make sure you go and open up that workbook. And here you go. When it does open up, we'll take a look at what that means. Okay, so if you are following along with me, we have our workbook labeled 2A through 2C, the customer orders. And notice there are multiple tabs, anywhere from customer discount, job profit, etc. And to make sure we are going to start off, we're going to be working with the if functions and specifically exercise 2A. To start things off, again, we're in the appropriate workbook, but you want to make sure you click on the customer discount tab. So at the very bottom, click on customer discount tab. And I'm going to go and zoom in just a tad bit so we can see this a little bit better. But as you can see here on the customer discount tab, we have very specific customers who maybe made orders for very specific amounts back in 2018. And what we want to find out is whether they have a discount or not, or qualify for maybe promotion of a discount. So to do this, this is where we use if functions. And if functions alone, what they're built for is for logical equations. There has to be conditions that have to be met, and that could be either true or a false value. So if, for example, and I'm sure a lot of folks do that these days, where maybe you shop on Amazon and you are a Prime member. So because you are a Prime member, that's a condition that's met. Because of that, you receive free shipping or expedited shipping in some cases. And if you're not, again, you get regular shipping, you might have to pay. So basically, that's a condition that's not met. Another analogy that I tend to use in instructor-led classes is perhaps you're shopping and at this particular vendor, if you spend maybe $100, they'll give you maybe 20% off through a coupon based on spending minimally $100. So again, if we meet the $100 minimum requirement, we then qualify for this 20% discount, and that means it's a true value. So that concept actually holds true in a logical if function. To set this up, where we want to start out is, again, this customer discount tab. And specifically, join me where we click on cell D5, as in dog 5, D5, because this is where we want to identify if our customers receive a discount, as in yay or nay. So to begin here, now that we selected the appropriate cell, we're going to go up to the top to the Formulas tab. In the Formulas tab, we have the function library group. And specifically, the one we're aiming for is what's called the logical function. That's the one with the question mark. So if I maximize real quick, because most of your screens probably look like this, again, function library in the ribbon. This is our group specifically, and we're looking for this question mark one, and if I hover over it, it says add a logical function to your worksheet. And quite frankly, there's a ton, so we're going to pull the arrow down. This will now be in alphabetical order, and the one we're aiming for is what's called if. Okay, and once you do that, you get this function arguments window, again floating, if you need to move it around, and we're going to build out from here. So at this point, in this dialog box for the function arguments window, this is where we need to set up the criteria. And in the logical test field, this is where we're going to type in what's called C5. Notice C5 is the order amount, for example, that our customer Mercury Inc. completed. So in this first field, we want to type in C5, meaning their order amount. If it's greater, so we're going to use the greater symbol, which is shift period, and that's again the arrow pointing right for a greater than symbol, 10,000. And when we plug in 10,000, no need for a comma, no special effects, it's just 10000. So that's the test that we're trying to figure out. If it is true, meaning if the value for C5 is truly greater than 10,000, which clearly is based on just visually looking at this, we want to just in the cell put in the word discount. So in the second open field, you're going to type in the word discount. If we did not meet that criteria, meaning it's not over 10,000, in the false value here in the open space, we want to type in no discount, meaning they do not qualify, they will not get a discount. So if this all holds true, again, this is the equivalent of building out a formula. The difference, we're just in a arguments window. So notice my formula bar at the top is absolutely building. One thing I'll point out is because we're using the function arguments box, no need to plug in quotes. Excel will actually automatically do that for you. So to preview it, notice on this right hand side, I could see that what I'm typing in is technically true, which is indeed correct because 12,000 is greater than 10,000, so it's true. And what will reveal is the word discount. Notice it's already quoted for me, and because I'm still typing this in, there's no need to plug in quotes. Excel will do that. So once you're ready, we're going to click on that OK button, and here we go. In cell D5, which is where we wanted this to take place, our customer, Mercury Inc., absolutely qualifies for a discount because they spent 12,000, which is indeed greater than 10,000. Our original argument. So in this case, this is fantastic. This is exactly what we want to find out. Now imagine having a ton of customers worldwide. This is where all of this comes into place. So guess what? We're going to use autofill. Whether you decide to click on cell D5, click and drag down, your choice, or you can double click. I will personally just try this and click drag down. So at this point, you should see all of your customers, whether they qualify for that discount or not, depending on their order amount in column C. So when I'm reviewing this, it's apparent Mercury Inc., Roslyn Brothers, and B&B Supply Company, they've all clearly spent over $10,000. So yes, indeed, they want to get a discount. Or I'm sorry, they will get a discount. Now here's the thing, maybe we negotiate because we know they get a discount. Another logical argument is if they qualified, what is their discount amounts, to be quite frank? And maybe, as you can see here in column J, we've negotiated that to be, say, 5% off the total order. So in this case, we're going to build out a second logical arguments window to figure out in column F the exact amount that they get for their total discount. To start that off, go and click on cell F5, Frank 5, okay? So if you click there, this is again where we're going to begin our argument. Just like before, we're going to go up to the top, make sure we're on the Formulas tab, and go to Logical Group and select If. This takes us back to that function arguments window that we saw before. The difference is we're going to plug in the discount amount instead of the verbiage discount or not. So in the logical tests, the question is how much did they spend, which is in column C, as in Charlie. So we want to say C5 is greater than 10,000 because that's our original argument still. So I'm typing at the very first open field for the logical test, C5, based on the order amount, we're starting here, is greater than 10,000. So if it's true, as we mentioned, they get a discount, but how much exactly? 5% off. So in this second open field where if the value is true, we're going to type C5, or technically you could click the cell, it's up to you. And because we're giving a discount of 5%, that means times, which is shift 8, 0.05, because again, this is percentage, 0.05. Notice I'm getting already a preview. This is indeed true. They're supposedly going to get about 600. Now, if it was not true, we're just going to put a numerical amount, which in this case is nothing, so 0 in the false field. So to review, our logical test is C5 is greater than 10,000, so basically the order amount. And if it is indeed true, if that criteria is met, we get a discount of 5%, so we do C5 times 0.05, and the false value is simply 0 because they don't qualify. So when we're ready, we're going to click on the OK button, and you should see in F5, where we originally started, that value is $600 that they get off. Now notice in my formula bar, here is that if function built out based on what we use in the function arguments window. And guess what? We're not done there. We want to figure out for all those other customers that did qualify potentially, what are their discount amounts? And guess what? You could do that same thing through autofill like we saw with the others. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to click down or drag down and we're going to see JD Construction. They did not meet. They're right at the $10,000. We should have spent maybe a penny more and they could have qualified. But at this point, we're very strict. It is none. To review Cabinet Masters, same thing. They're clearly not at that $10,000 amount, so they don't get a discount, which is 0. And then we have Roslyn Brothers, who definitely did, and they have a 5% discount off their total bill. In this case, it's $750. Myers M&B, same thing. They didn't qualify because they did not meet that criteria. But our last customer listed in row 11, B&B Supply Company, they clearly spent over $10,000, so they qualify for the discount. Specifically, that equates to $600. All right, so that, my friends, is just reviewing what we did here specifically with using the if function. Again, these are conditions that have to be met. We technically did 2 different conditions. Is it a discount? Yes or no? And if it is yes, meaning yes, what exactly is that dollar amount equating to with the discount? And sometimes you may have if functions built on if functions and if functions. It's almost like, as I shared with my class earlier, was on Amazon, I'm looking for a black shirt, but that black shirt has to be from a very specific company that uses maybe organic cotton. And then they also need to have a very specific size, anywhere from small, medium, large. We also need to make sure that the amount that they're selling it for is maybe hopefully less than $20. And the point is, there's a lot of criteria that has to be met, and that is where your if functions can come in. So just to share some tips and tricks, if I could zoom in a tad bit, some tips for if functions: when you're inputting your text, you want to make sure that the text that's used in the formula is also located in your criteria. So for example, this is why we use the word discount, because that's what we're trying to find out. Specifically, when you type in that verbiage, does case sensitivity matter? It indeed does not, but you need to be able to spell it correctly. So this could have been discount lowercase with a D. Same thing for the N, it really would not matter. Again, it is just solely looking for what you're trying to do. And then the last piece really is just the fact that because we use the function arguments window, as I mentioned before, no need for quotes because Excel will automatically insert that for you. So just for reference, if I were to click on randomly here, F11 for our B&B company, yes, we visually see it's $600, but as you could see here in the formula bar, I have that built out specifically in cell D11. Going back to the quotes, you could see that it's automatically quoted for me. We did not have to do that because we were in the function arguments window. Now, if you were typing out this total formula in the bar itself, you would need to plug in those quotes because you are manually taking ownership of that. And that, my friends, is the beauty of using this FX function arguments window. It will do a lot of that legwork for you in the event that you're not comfortable. And we'll see later there is a difference between a double quote and a single quote. Those translate to very different behaviors specifically in Excel. Okay, so that, my friends, is 2A. We concluded that, and where this takes us is into 2B. And this is where we get to play with what's called VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup for you. So what that means is we're going to be able to reference very specific data in a table, and that table is vertically set up, meaning it's in columns. And so we're going to check that out specifically with this next exercise. We're still staying in the same exact workbook, but this time specifically with a quarterly bonus tab. So if you're joining me, and actually let me make this a tad bit bigger. Sorry about that. Here we go. We are on, again, exercise 2B. 2B as in Bravo. Okay. And here we are. We're sticking still in the same workbook, but specifically go ahead and click on the quarterly bonus sheet. And let me zoom in a tad bit here. So in reviewing this, this happens to be the sales performance on a quarterly basis for 4 very specific individuals. We could see for their sales performance for each particular month and their year-to-date total sales. Based on their year-to-date total sales, according to HR, they qualify potentially for a bonus. And that bonus, the brackets that we're looking for, the criteria is built here in this mini table located in column J and K. So for example, if they exceeded $20,000 in sales, they qualify for a bonus of $2,000. If it's $15,000 but below 20, we get $1,500 of a bonus. $10,000 but less than $15,000, I qualify for $1,000, and so forth. And so if you think of those bronze, silver, gold statuses, this is a very similar concept, but the difference here is we are referencing data from a very specific table, and our goal is to fill out in column G what exactly is the bonus amount. Imagine if you had hundreds of salespeople, not just nationally, but globally, and you needed to do this. So we're going to figure out this in a quick, fast way. To start things off, here's what I want you to do. We're going to select cells J3 through K7. So J3 through K7, which is the bonus numerical values from this mini table. And we're going to build on some of the skills that we've already learned. So we want to rename this mini table to bonus underscore lookup. And we're going to do that by going to the top left to the name box. We're going to delete what's there, so delete the J3. And specifically, we're going to type in bonus underscore lookup. Once you're ready, just hit enter so that it takes it. And if you want to validate, you can just put this arrow down. You'll see there is your cell name range. And if you need to really triple check, click anywhere outside of that. You can double check. Here is that name range. So that's the first step. This is where we're going to reference. Second step, we're going to now fill out the exact bonus amounts based on their year-to-date sales performance. To do so, go and join me. We're going to click on cell G2, as in green 2, go to, if you will. Once you click on there, we're going to go up to the formulas tab, and we're looking specifically for the lookup and reference functions. And that is, my friends, the one with the what is that, microscope? I think that's a microscope. I don't know what that thing's called. But yes, that guy. And as you can see, it is to look up or reference to the worksheet. And that's what exactly we want to do. So when you click on that particular one, again, there's a lot more arguments that you could do with this and functions. So specifically, what we're aiming for is V as in victory lookup. So we're going to scroll down because it's alphabetically ordered and you want to find V lookup. And as you can see, when I'm hovering over it, it says we are looking for a value in the leftmost column of a table. Remember, the table that we did was called the bonus lookup, that at least we renamed. And we're going to return the value, meaning the output, specifically where we want to specify, and that is starting in cell G2, and that's why we click there. So that's why we need to make sure we already have our table set up. That was job 1. And that's why this is what's called a vertical lookup, because it's referencing the table itself, which in this case is vertically set up. So once I'm ready, go and click on this V lookup, and this takes us back to that beautiful function arguments window. We are now going to fill out the fields, and specifically where we have the lookup value, meaning where are we looking up, what are we referencing. This is the year-to-date sales, so we're going to start that out with F2. So you're going to type in F2, or you're going to click the cell F2, either or you want to fill that first part in with F2. The second piece, the table array, where is it referencing? That is what we refer to as the range, renamed as bonus lookup. So we want to make sure we type that in there, bonus underscore lookup. And as you can see, it's starting to preview some of the data, but we're not done because this is a table and it has multiple columns. Remember, according to that definition, it's the leftmost column. Now this table in J and K, that is 2 total columns. So in this COL, which is short for column, underscore index, what that's referring to is the number of columns. So for this reason, we're going to input the number 2. There is no need to fill out the range lookup, so we just need to fill out the first 3 parts, which is F2 in the lookup value, table array, which is your bonus lookup name range, and the column index number, which is the number of columns for our table here. That is in 2 in total because we have a total in J and then the bonus for K. And once you're ready, we're going to hit the OK button and we will yield the output in G2. When you do that, you should see 2,000, which is indeed correct because Steimer in row 2 completed more than $20,000. So according to our table, he qualifies for the $2,000 bonus. Woohoo! Go Steimer. Okay. Now imagine having hundreds and thousands of salespeople. We want to make sure they are appropriately credited, so we're going to autofill. Love that. So yes, click on cell G2. Wait till that your mouse itself changes to that filled plus sign, drag down, and here you go. According to this, Wilton, who did a little over 15,000, he did over 15,000 according to our table, so that should be a 1,500 bonus, which is indeed correct. McConnell in row 4 did 17,000 and some change, which is above 15,000 but less than 20, so he still falls into this 1,500 bonus bracket, and yep, that is indeed correct. So according to row 5, Lampkin, they tried their best. It's all good coming out the gate. We're just shy of 7,000, which is still above 5,000, but lower than 10,000 in our bonus table. So he at least, or she should at least get the 500 bonus. Hey, I'll take it, right? So at this point, what we just did was validate data and reference it very quickly, but through a setup of a table that was vertically set up. So just to debrief some tips for you, sometimes you may hear of other lookup functions such as HLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, and so forth. All of that simply depends on how is your data set up, but more importantly, the table array of where it's referencing. So specifically, there's really two main types, two major ones, HLOOKUP and VLOOKUP. Your best practice is to really assess the data, not necessarily the headers, but that way you can take a look at your table and refer to it as a cell name range, which is why we first changed it to bonus lookup. Just some key pointers. If the table has row headings, meaning it is a horizontal table, you want HLOOKUP for horizontal lookup. What that's referring to, if you look at this image on the right, for example, this is set up in rows, so it's horizontally referencing the data, and that translates to you should be using the HLOOKUP function. In contrast, on the left-hand side, if your table has column headers, and most of them usually are set up this way. So an example we used was the top are row labels basically. In this case, that is a vertical table, and hence we use the VLOOKUP for vertical lookup. That is, again, that's a table array that it's being referenced. So just some things to really think about. Light bulb moment, folks. Now, where this takes us, we're going to wrap up in Exercise 2C, where we start working with another type of function, specifically a database function. And where this comes in is we're going to be able to see the versatility of how you can quickly change criteria rather than using a bunch of if functions stacking upon each other. So earlier, what I was referencing about the whole Amazon order with the black shirt, that pretty much holds true here. Excel can be used also as a database where it's storing a lot of data, right? So imagine if you're a vendor for Amazon, for example. You have a lot of different SKUs, and all of those different SKUs have different prices. They have different descriptions. They have different... I don't know. I don't sell on Amazon, but the key is there's a lot of different criteria, and for every data point, there could be a lot more items to be referenced. And so the key to database functions, instead of doing if function upon if function, so I found a black shirt, but it's less than $20, and it has to be organic cotton, and I don't know, sold from only the United States. Those are all if functions, and I can do that all in one shot. So it's a fast way to drill down data, but also kind of reference through a table. So to do so, we're going to actually participate on this particular exercise for 2C. We're going to still stay in the 2A through C workbook, but this time we want to click on what's called the daily job cost sheets. So let's check that out, what that looks like now. All right, so here we go. I just want to make sure we're all set up for success. So again, we are looking for the daily job costs worksheets. When you look at it, you will see in columns A through H just a ton of data. Customer XYZ, they purchased very specific job types that required very specific labor amounts. And this was done on very specific dates with a supply cost, a total labor cost, and all in what did that mean for the day. So lots of quick, fast data, and I'm just going to slightly zoom out so you can see it a tad bit. But here we go. Notice in this case, I have a mini table kind of setup, and it's located in J1 all the way through Q1. And this is my customers, supplies, and so forth. Notice this section here at the top right does match the setup here. So I just want to briefly point that out. And the reason why is we might want to just drill down this data instead of Control F. If I found something on XYZ dates and if it was a certain job, I can immediately get an output for that. So that's what we're going to test out now through this exercise of 2C. So in order to do this, what we want to first do is go to cell Q2, as in Queen 2, Quebec 2. We're going to click in there a very specific date, and that's going to be February 4th of 2018. February 4th of 2018, go ahead and insert that into cell Q2. So our goal is to find out a very specific job cost that occurred on that day. Mind you, we're in 2022, that was a while ago, so I am absolutely going to research the books, and that's what we're doing now. To do so, again, we're going to set up the database function. So, I'm sorry, I think I said this all wrong. My bad. I just noticed Q2, I'm in the supply cost. So that's called a trainer fail. Let's reverse the tape one time. We're actually going to go to the cell to the left, N2, order date. My bad. And that is where we type in that date of February 4th, 2018. So again, just writing the tape back. February 4th, 2018, specifically in cell N2, Nancy number 2. Okay, and the goal, as I mentioned, is to find the total job cost, which is basically Q2 on this far right. Clearly, I don't know my letters and numbers these days, so I'm so sorry about that. But we want to find out that total job cost and have that output put here in this Q2 cell. So we're going to set up the database function. To do so, we're going to go up to the tab at the top labeled Formulas. And specifically, because it's not really listed here in the function library as a button, we're going to go to the far left where we have Insert Function. And once you click on Insert Function, again, you're going to get this pop-up box for Insert Function. Notice there's a little description up the top. We're going to skip that, but where it says O select a category, that's where we're going to pull down on. And specifically, the category that we want is labeled as Database. This is not alphabetically ordered, so just something to keep in mind. You want to search down, it's about halfway through, and find database. How I got here again was the arrow pointing down. As soon as you find it, make sure you select database. Now, because this is a very specific type of function, there's other types of functions that you could build on top of that. So in this whole library, what we're going to do now is we're going to scroll in the second half where it says select a function. And these are now alphabetically ordered. So you want to scroll all the way down to where you have what's called DSUM, standing for database sum for a type of formula. And you're going to click OK. Now we're at the point where we can now build out that function and these arguments specifically. And so what we're going to do is set this up in the database field. That is the reference area, meaning all the data that we want. So if you decide, you can either type A4 through H29. It is up to you, but I am a terrible typer. So I'm personally going to select the cells using my mouse. So I'm going to select from A4 at the top left and pull all the data, which goes all the way down to approximately H29. Notice the colon meaning through because it is a range of cells. So the next part is in the field, which is the second open field option. What we want to include in there specifically is H4. You can type it or you can click the box itself as in the cell. H4 refers to the total job cost. And again, we want whatever's in this column of H to actually output into column Q, specifically Q2. And that's why in the field we're selecting H4 because we're referencing the original data in the column of H. The next part is to set up the criteria. Where are we putting the output? Where is this text going to go? And specifically, we have a range for that, and that's here at the top, specifically from J1 all the way through P2, because we're going to insert the data there, the output. Okay, so J1 through P2 as in Paul 2. And if you're like me, as you could see, I totally clicked on the wrong area. I'm going to click for sure in the criteria, third field down, and then reselect that J1 through P2 as in Paul 2. And at this point, yours should look exactly like this. Notice you get a preview to the right, so we could see exactly this range being referenced. What is the field that we really need to identify? In this case, it is the total job costs all in. And where we're going to put that output is the range from J1 through P2, which is at the very top. Once you're ready, you're going to click that OK button, and then you will see a value in that cell Q2 where we originally started. And in this case, it is 34,990. And if you're actually taking a look at your raw data in your data here of row 5, specifically on February 4th of 2018, as you can see, we had just one customer, and that customer did cost the job itself $34,990. So it's pretty awesome. It did a quick, fast search for you, but again, there may be multiple criteria. We're just kind of warming you up here. This is strictly a very specific date with a very specific job cost. We're going to see how this is very versatile, specifically using the database functions. So in this case, what we want to do is, let's say instead of February 4th, we want to switch up the date. So we're going to go to cell N2, and we're going to change that from the February 4th date to instead February 7th. So you're going to type the February 7th date of 2018 into cell N2 as in Nancy number 2. And once you're done, go ahead and hit enter. And what's going to happen is you should also see an updated output for the total job costs. And that, as you can see in Q2, is 13,900. If you're unsure and feel uncomfortable with Excel, let's triple check its work. And I'm sorry, let me zoom out so I'm not seeing everything. So we selected February 7th. So in this case, that's row 9 and 10. And at that point, notice in our total job costs, 6,950 2 times. If I actually hover over it, and at the bottom, I could see a quick, fast one here. My sum is indeed 13,900. And again, in Q2, we're looking for a total, the sum, which is why that reflects the values of 13,900 for our customer Bright Homes. Okay, specifically on the February 7th date. All right, so that was kind of cool. We got to check that out real fast. So in this case, let's just say, yeah, we want February, but a different date. And we're going to go with February 11th, for example. So let's switch up the date one more time in cell N2. And that is going to go from the 7th to the 11th. And let's say beyond the total job cost, we want to find out a very specific job cost for a job type. And so the job type, meaning in cell L2 at the top, I want you to type in the word countertop. Countertop. Okay? And the reason for this is we're aiming to search all the data in our table here, specifically for a job referred to as countertop on February 11th of 2018, and what was the total cost. Your total value should yield, if I did this correctly, 17,822.30. And that is indeed true, because if you look actually at your data on February 11th, so this is a good day, aka because we got a lot of customers coming in, but not all of them got a countertop install. So specifically row 12, row 13, row 14, and row 15, these all got a countertop install. And if you do the math, quote unquote, here is that total. Whoops, I can't read today. Here we go. So that is indeed correct though. We have 17,882.30. Okay, and so the point to a lot of this was through a database function, instead of going, if we met the criteria of February 11th, if we sold a countertop job specifically, what does that mean in terms of our total job costs? And that's just a lot of setup. So if you want to quickly do that, that is through, again, a database function. So to recap here, folks, what have we been doing in this second module? We have been playing with a little bit more advanced functions and formulas. We started off specifically with just if functions where we had logical values. It could be true or false, and kind of built that argument from there. We then checked out sometimes you get a lot of data and you might have a table to reference, whether it's vertically set up or horizontally. That was the where we saw the vertical lookup and the H lookup. And this last exercise was where we had maybe potentially a lot of if functions. Instead of doing a lot of if functions on top of each other, we just used the database function to research as if it was used as a database, the Excel sheet alone. So otherwise, we're going to take this up a notch and we're going to build out to our third module, which is where we pick up on all this data. Now that we've cleaned the house, cleaned it up and understand it, and we've maybe analyzed it, we need to be able to share that story visually. So this is where we're going to learn how to actually take that data and build out very specific basic charts. The types of charts that we'll be playing with, as you can see here, there's three major items that we'll do in these particular module. We're going to, one, learn how to create the charts first off. But as we start creating charts, just kind of differentiate the differences between them all. And we'll then start building them out through very specific layouts and even go so far to format it so that it looks and feels hopefully appealing and truly shares the story that we would hope. Now, before we do this, I do want to point out when you're working with your data, you will be the person to, of course, determining how and what that story will look like. Now, if you have what's called a single series of data, generally you will use what's called a pie chart. So a single series of data refers to, let's just say it's just myself. I happen to be a salesperson and I produce XYZ sales amounts, and that's it. So there's not too much to think about. It's just a one and done deal. If I need to add other criteria, so using that same scenario where I'm just maybe a salesperson and I sold a very specific amount, maybe I want to go so deep as to find out an exact month, or I need to even compare with other salespeople, even at not necessarily a national level, but maybe a country level. So it really just depends, but the point was there's multiple criteria, aka a multiple series of data. Because there's so much different criteria that you'll be working with, generally speaking, you'll not use a pie chart. It's not 100% value. You may use more than likely other types of charts, such as a column chart and so forth. So that's what we're going to see shortly. In just a moment, to set you up for success, for Module 3, there's only one workbook that we'll be using. It's labeled 3A through 3C, specifically revenues. So take a moment. We want to go and, if you have any other workbooks open, some of our previous exercises, you're welcome to close it out. And we're looking for, again, exercise workbook 3A through 3C, the revenues. And there will simply be two tabs. So let me just set this up so that you can all see where we're going with it. Alrighty, so now that we have this set up for you, once you have the 3A through 3C workbook open, this has to do with revenue, you'll see that there's simply two tabs. We have revenue representing for 2017 and also 2018. For this particular exercise, we're going to first start out with the 2017 revenues tab. So go ahead and click there. And when it comes to creating charts with Excel, first thing you got to do, because it's just Excel being picky, input determines output. So we need to first select the data in order to tell Excel what we're working with. So for this particular exercise, we're going to select the cells from A3 through C10. So basically our customer, products, and install, and the exact revenue amount, whether it's a product or installation. So again, go ahead and select A3 through C10. As soon as you select the data, our next step is then to determine what type of chart we want by going up to the top. We're going to click the Insert tab. And through the Insert tab, you're going to see an updated ribbon, of course. Through this ribbon, there is a charts, and let me just maximize here, charts group, and that's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time for this module. In this example, we're going to just hover around to see some of the different charts. So go ahead and join me. We're going to hover over this bar or cluster styled chart and just hover over it. When you do that, you will see again this particular chart type visually compares values across different categories. So in this case, we have product and installs in the different customer types. So if you click the button itself, there's different charts, and again, hover to discover. I want you to hover over the different charts so you can get a preview of what will happen. So join me. We're going to see this 2D section. If you hover over the first one, which is a clustered column, I can immediately see that the chart is embedded into the exact sheet that I'm on, so the 2017 revenues sheet, and I can see just a preview of what it would look like. Feel free to check out some others. So I'm going to go to the right a little bit, and this is a stacked column, so they're on top of each other, if you will. They're stacked. So you get a great preview, and these are simply 2D, so nothing too crazy. I'm on the far right version, and this is what's called 100% stacked. And now I could see if I were to compare it to 100% rates, here is what it would look like in a column. You can even go so far to check out 2D bar and 3D, basically one's vertical and horizontal. Really depends on you. We're going to keep this nice and simple, so I'm going to click this first option, the clustered column, and I'm going to click OK. And great, if I maximize here, notice the chart is totally taking over my data, and if that happens to you, I'm going to zoom out just a tad bit. The chart itself will immediately embed to the current tab that you're on. So notice I'm still in the 2017-18 tab. But here's what you want to do. Once you work with charts and you click the chart itself, you will see at the very top there's two new tabs. We didn't have this before. It's called Chart Design, which is the design of the chart itself. And then in a little bit, we're going to work on formatting, which is how does it look and feel. So we're going to spend our time primarily first in this chart design. A good best practice is for most folks, they will not generally have a chart embedded with the raw data. You usually want to separate that because visually you're trying to share a story, and if you see the raw data, that might just like mess up your story. So what I mean by that is your chart itself, this is totally movable, it's floatable. So when your mouse changes into these 4 arrows that point in all different directions, that means it's ready for you to move. So you're going to click, hold, and drag if you need. And notice when I do that, my raw data on my left, the blue is the values, so what appears in these bars. The red is, of course, the legend. So notice automatically Excel is going to try and do the legwork for you. Is it perfect? Probably not, but it does do a pretty good job. Absolutely. But you're going to be able to, again, start customizing this. So I just want to share with you, I didn't choose these colors. I didn't choose what it looks like. That's all Excel. Now going back to the point of usually for charts, you will not usually have the raw data next to the chart. We want to be able to move this. So to do so, just make sure your chart itself is clicked on, so you'll know that because it has these circles in all 4 corners. We're going to go up to the Chart Design tab, and in this ribbon to the far right, you have a location group. We want to click the Move Chart button, and that's exactly what it's going to do. We're going to move the chart, but where? So when this happens, you're going to get this dialog window pop up, which is again floatable, or maybe I'm creating my words here. It's a floating window. And for this one, we're just going to select this new sheet option instead of an object in. And by default, because this is a chart, it defaults to the title of chart 1. Let's just say we're okay with that. Once you're ready, you're going to click on the OK button. When you do that, here we are. This is the exact same workbook that we started with, but notice at the bottom left, I now have a Chart 1 tab. And what that means is we are on the chart specifically that we just created. By default, the title is labeled Chart Title, which doesn't really help us. So in a bit, we'll learn how to also customize that. Okay, so what we just did was start creating a chart from that raw data, but specifically a column chart. What we're going to check out next is a comparison of the exact same data, but maybe this is not really doing us much justice in terms of the storytelling. Maybe you want to see visually what it would look like with other charts. So that's what we're going to check out now, specifically through a line chart. Again, just using the exact same data, we're going to go back to the 2017 revenue tab. If your criteria is not selected, go ahead to reselect it, and that's from cells A3 to cell C10. You always want to make sure it's selected first, because input, again, will determine output, meaning how your chart will be impacted. So for this one, let's go back to the Insert tab, and we're going to hover into the Charts group, which is usually center of your ribbon. And below where we first started with the bar chart, we're going to go with the line or area chart. So it's the one with the little squiggly lines, if you will. Go ahead and click that button, similar to what we saw before. And again, you can hover to discover, hover over it. You're going to get a preview every single time. So this here is just the line. If I hover over this guy, it's a stacked line where they're separated. You then have the stack line, but at 100% rates. This one has markers. You can go so far to go to 3D or 3D area style. I don't know if that's all good, but again, you will determine that. Right now, we're just going to keep it real simple, and I'm going to go stick at the top for 2D, specifically just a line chart. So I'm going to click on there. And just like before, by default, thanks Excel, I'm covering up my data, but that's going to happen, okay? So we, again, have this embedded. Notice I have the same data, red for installs, product is in blue for the different customers. And visually, that's a slightly different story, but again, you will decide how you want this to look and feel. So because we don't want it, again, embedded into the raw data, we don't want it covering, again, this is totally movable, etc. So what we're going to do is move the chart itself. So to do so, again, click the chart itself till you have the circles all in the four corners. You should have a chart design tab, so I'm just going to maximize here. And again, we're going to move this into its own separate tab. So to do so, stay in the ribbon bar, and we're going to go to the far right where we have Move Chart. Go ahead in this pop-up where we have Move Chart, we're going to select between the two options, the first one, which is labeled New Sheets. Instead of Chart 2, let's go ahead and give this an actual name, and we're going to call this Trends, T-R-E-N-D-S. Once you're happy with that, go ahead and click on OK. And what should happen is you will see that same chart, but now in its own separate tab, specifically labeled Trends. And as we saw before, no chart title. It's literally just that, but at least we got the labels in there. Well, sort of. We got the visual going. So what we just did, to recap here, we created a chart with the exact same data, but saw specifically in a line chart what that would look like. On this next exercise, still on 3A, we're going to still create a chart, but primarily view this as a pie chart. So to do so, join me. This time we're going to play with the 2018 revenue data. So go ahead and click 2018 Revenues tab. Now, as you can see, it's very similar to 2017. In this case, because we want to practice with pie charts, we want a single set of data. So again, we have to select the very specific criteria. In this case, we want from A3 to B9. So just the customer name and their product amounts, basically. And from here, again, this is a singular set of data. So we're going to go up to the top, hit that Insert tab. We're going to go back to that charts group, but this time, instead of the second icon down, we're going to go with the third, which is labeled as Insert Pie, or one of my favorites, donut charts. Everything food related is the best, I'm just saying. So click on that pie chart button, and just like before, you can still preview by hovering over it. So here's a nice 2D style. You can even separate them out. It's pretty awesome. There can go so far as 3D pie, and then the bottom one again is donut. Ooh, fancy. Okay. Now, again, these are default options. So just to check this out, we're going to select the 3D pie. 3D pie. Okay, so click on it. And we saw this before. It's going to embed in our raw data, the tab we're on now, which is 2018. We're just going to keep it there, and that's fine. It is what it is. Notice a little different here. Because this is a pie chart, singular set of data, you have your customers, who is the bottom as part of your legend. And then our products, which is just the other data that we're comparing against, that's why the title is products. So the pie itself is measuring the products, supposedly in dollar amounts. But as you can see, I don't know that because there's nothing that says like dollars. So we're going to see how that happens in these next couple of exercises. The point that I'm trying to make is this is a singular set of data. And what I love about pie charts, check this out, you can call a piece out. Feel free to join me, and this might take some practice, but generally when you click on the pie itself, so I'm going to click randomly here on this blue part, okay, notice it has all these circles around the pie. That means I'm selecting the entire pie. I don't really want that right now. In fact, I just want to call out the biggest piece, which supposedly kind of looks like this blue, darker blue shaded area. So you want to click again, and usually you're just picking a very specific pie piece. And yes, I have 3 points here, which is just that specific pie piece. So I'm going to click, drag, and pull wherever I want to call it out. So I'm going to do that now. Click, drag, and pull. And notice it extends it outside. So now I can really say like, hey, that is the slice I want you to really eyeball because it looks delicious. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, that is the pie that I'm talking about. So the key here is just to create the chart. We checked out so far different types. We started out with the cluster chart. We then went, bar chart, if you will. And then we checked out the trends as in linear. We then even saw specifically a pie chart. So just some quick, fast ways to create a visual graphic with some of the same data. Where this takes us, as I'd mentioned, is in our eyes, we might want those very specific data, very specific graphics, but let's see if Excel thinks otherwise. And there's what's called a recommended chart. So based on the data selected, Excel is going to try and do its work and see what will work best for you. Let's try this out one more time, and this time we're going to stick with the 2017 revenues tab. So click on 2017 revenues tab. Again, if it's not selected anymore, feel free to reselect from A3 through C10. And once you do that, we're going to follow along just like we've seen all along. We're going to hit that Insert tab at the very top. We're going to see this updated ribbon, and we're going to spend our time in the chart group. This time, we're going to click the Recommended Charts button. And as you can see verbatim, it says, want us to recommend a good chart or to showcase your data? Absolutely, Excel. I don't want to think so much. So when you're ready, click the button. And hey, guess what? We get this Insert Chart dialog window. And there's 2 tabs, either the recommended charts, or I can compare with all other types of charts. So let's see what Excel thinks. According to Excel, we want to stick with like cluster bar charts. How do you want it to look? Again, hover to discover. You can always use the scroll bar so I can like pull down, kind of get a quick visual. There's different types of charts. And in this case, usually the first one's pretty spot on. So I'm going to go and select this first one of the cluster bar. And when I do that, I get this preview to the right. Notice the cluster bar is used to compare those values that we saw earlier. And in this case, it is looking to the right. So if I click on OK, sweet, there's the charts. Pretty cool, but I don't know, maybe I'm not too happy with it. It's just kind of weird going to the right. So we can always check this out by changing the chart type maybe one more time. And just to share with you, because we've done this so many different times, we're going to try this one more time to change the chart type. And this was clearly embedded, so I'm just going to move it on. And as long as the chart itself is selected, there's another way technically that you can change your chart type. Let's say we decide, you know what, even though Excel suggested this, it's just not meeting my needs. So through the Chart Design tab at the top, as long as you find that, in the ribbon bar, there's second from the right, the Change Chart Type. And that's exactly what it's going to do, change our chart to a different type. So click the button. And notice in this case, Excel originally also suggested the bars cluster style, but there's another kind. So if I want to hover to my right and switch gears to that, that's cool. I'll try it. So I'm going to click that one. And again, I'm hovering, okay, so it's being a little wonky here. When I click on it and I click OK, notice I have the darker gray around that. It's bordered, meaning it's selected. And I'm going to click OK. And I'm going, all right, this is maybe a little bit better to share my story. I now have the installs and products as two separate categories, but I could see exactly by the customer who produced or who had the most revenue, and clearly that's the Roslin brothers according to this. So again, you're going to be able to decide which graph will truly share your story, but let's take it up a notch. We don't want this, we're kind of happy, let's say, with this. In the chart title, to update the chart title, you're going to just click on it and actually double click so that you're in the box itself. You don't want to just be on it, you want to be in it so you could change it up. And specifically, let's just title this revenues. Make this real simple, revenues. So you're typing it in there, and in order for the data update, just click outside of it, and here you are. You have a beautiful graphic with an updated chart name. Okay, so where does this take us? Let me just get back to my original view here. We looked at 3, if not 4 different chart types with literally the same data, and they all shared a story in one way, shape, or form. You, again, as the author of this, will be the one to decide that. And let me just back out here so visually is better. But otherwise, where we're going with this, okay, now that we've maybe decided on a chart, let's bring it up a notch visually so that it looks pretty cool. And what I mean by that is we are going to play around specifically with the chart type, as in like how does it look? And that's what we saw when we changed gears into that second clustered style, just for reference, okay? And as another way to see this, if you click the chart itself and I go to the chart design tab, again, one quick, fast, and really awesome way to change up the style itself. In the chart design tab, in the very center, there's what's called a chart styles group. This is where if you hover on it, you can change what the chart actually looks like. Again, hover to discover. This is a little bit more pastel looking. I got a little gray in the background. Maybe I really like this dark view that actually looks pretty cool. And if you want to see a lot more in this chart style group, just hit this arrow pointing down with the line. This is the overall visual style. So if I click there, I can really just see all the other options. And let's say I want to stick with like the dark mode. I'll click there and notice the entire chart changed. Pretty fancy, folks. You can floor your friends and family and your coworkers in using all of this. It's a great way to play with the different chart types and then the styles. So speaking of styles, let's take a look also at the chart layouts just to see how we can make it look a little bit more visually appealing and really share the story that we like. And so where we're taking this is specifically in exercise 3B, where we're going to work with those chart layouts. Let's go ahead and go back to that 2018 revenues tab. This is the one that we had the pie charts. Okay, so once you click on the pie itself, or I'm sorry, the pie chart, remember we will always have this chart design tab. And so from here, what I want to share with you, and this is going to look a little cut off, so that's okay. What we're going to do is in this chart design tab, we're going to go to the far left of the ribbon. And in that far left button, you have what's called Add Chart Element. If you click that button, elements are all the criteria, the data, how it looks on the actual graphic alone. So that could be the title, that could be the legend, it could be the data labels, etc. So we're going to hover around and play with this. If you look at the chart title, so I'm hovering over it, not necessarily clicking on it. Notice I have more options to the right, and right now I do have a title. It's called products, but if I hover over none, it goes away, the title specifically. If I hover over the bottom option above chart, there it is, products is back, but above the pie. If we need to go down and do what's called center overlay, which is a little funky in my opinion, it's centered, but it's overlaid on the graphic. Again, you do what's best. I'm just going to keep it with like above chart. Okay. Now, going back to that add chart element button at the left, we're going to check out the data labels. And the data labels are, for example, in this case, the product amounts. So notice there's nothing on the pie. Like I have no idea what this is referring to. I just see it's a neat looking pie. And the reason why I don't see anything is because it says none. So we're going to scroll down, select the center option, and notice suddenly, as soon as I hover over the center, I have the data values here, the data labels specifically, and they're in the center of the pie. That's what that's referring to. Go ahead and scroll down just a tad bit more. Inside in means it's still inside the pie, on the interior, if you will, but towards the outer edges, that is inside in. Outside in means the data labels will be outside the pie, but right outside the end of the, what is this, circumference, okay? And notice the numbers just jumped out. And one of my favorites personally is what's called best fit. Let's let Excel do that work for you. And the best fit means, hey, you know, I think it's going to look like pretty good right in here. It's about centered for each pie piece. And great. So that's best fit. And then a really cool one is what's called the data callout. Here is where you can truly call out every specific pie piece. It looks like a chat bubble, if you will, and that's the data callout. Feel free to pick one that's of your liking. I personally will go with the best fit and keep it there. The last part that I want to share with you in the add chart element button, so join me at the top left, click on it, and we're going to hover down to legend. Legend, again, is our customers in this case. So right now, notice it's on the bottom, and that's because it's pre-selected on bottom. Go ahead and hover with me over none. Suddenly it's gone. If I hover over the right, here are my legends on the right. You can also go with top, left, and again bottom, which was our original. In this case, I'm just going to say, ooh, what looks fancy is the right, so I'm going to select right, and we're going to say we're pretty happy with that. So at this time, what we've taken a look at is specifically the chart layouts, checking out all the differences of what's in the actual graphic alone. Oh, there we go. I thought it got cut off. I was like, where did it go? So here we go. Again, that is what we recapped here on 3B. We're going to take this up a notch. Let's make sure it looks and feels pretty awesome. And specifically, let's still stay on this 2018 tab where we've been playing around with the pie piece. And what I want you to do is really just take a look at the different shape styles, word art styles, and so forth. So what I mean by that is, you know, we probably want to make this ADA compliant. These little data labels here for the dollar amounts, they're like, it's in black supposedly or a dark color, but there's certain colors like this purple where it's kind of hard to see. That's not generally a good thing. So visually you want to make sure it looks and feels the way you want it to look. So to do so, join me. We're going to click on 1. Okay, I say 1, just any one of these numbers. So I clicked on like 900, but technically what happened was it actually selected all the numbers. And the reason why is it's acting as a series, which is indeed correct. So through this, you can use the Format tab now. And the Formatting tab will allow you to update your shape style, your color, and so forth. But real quick, since we selected the numbers, join me. Let's make sure it's ADA compliant. Generally speaking, if you go back to your Home tab, so Home tab, in the font group, we're going to switch up to Arial font, size 12. That is generally the default for ADA compliance. Again, just feel free to triple check that. Notice it's a little bit better visually, but if you're like really nitpicky and you need to put a fill or a, I don't know, font color just for practice, feel free to try that. So I'm going to fill this out with maybe a green fill. I don't know why I would do that, but there you go. And then my font color itself, I'm going to go with maybe, I don't know, something that complements it. So like Yeah, let's go with this blue. Yeah, I'll go with yellow. It's a little bit better visually. Again, this would not strictly be ADA compliant, but the point was we've made the changes to the fonts to really call it out, make it bolder, brighter, bigger, etc. And that specifically was just by selecting the numerical values as in the series of the data. Other ways that I'll point out to you, and I personally like this, and I stress this generally in classes, I have a horrible habit of right clicking. So I will click on one of the values and right click to get this quick access toolbar. And what that means at the very bottom, I have what's called format data labels. The data labels are again the numbers. So suddenly what that does is I can go to my immediate right and I have this formatting data labels pane. And the best part, in my opinion, is the fact that there's two columns. Is it the data label options or is it the text that we're working with? Two totally different things. The label options, which is what we just saw going to the home tab, doing the fill and the font color, I can make more changes here. And one thing I'll point out specifically, the way this is formatted, it's pre-formatted to dollar signs, but just to be super sure, I can scroll down. I'm in the data, the label options, and you scroll down to the number field. Originally, this was not maximized, so I'm opening it by hitting the arrow pointing down. And now I can see with the numbers, I can format it through the categories. So if I pull down, it's on general. I might want to change that specifically to currency, so I make it very clear that this is dollars that I'm working with, and depending who your audience is, you may or may not need those decimal points, etc., and you might need to format it very specifically. So this is how you could do that with the label options. For the text specifically, I'm going to click on the right side here and you can totally fill out. So here's your text fill. I'm going to use this arrow pointing down. You could switch the colors and all that instead of going all the way to home. And if you need to even outline, for example, I'm going to outline mine and it has this, I don't know, random blue. All right, I guess that'll work for me for now. But again, it makes it just a little bit easier and I can see a lot more options here in my opinion, rather than going all the way to the top, going into the ribbon, and it may be hidden. So all of these would be the equivalent of hitting the little arrow pointing down to the right for the more options. It just, again, in my opinion, how I got here, right click is your friend, and it leads to a greater pane on the far right. All right, so basically we talked about, again, just formatting those. I'm going to close that pane out using the X. So other things you could do specific to formatting, if you click on your chart itself, like the pie, this is where you can go to the formatting tab, and let's say you're not happy with these colors. These are pretty much a default color. What just happened here? So just in case that happened, my bad, just click outside and just click the actual chart, so the entire box itself, if you start seeing things are grayed out in your ribbon. So to do so, I just clicked again the chart itself and I have these circles, which means it's selected. So I'm now going to go to that format tab, and what that means is I can change the fill colors. Here at the shape styles group, I can use this arrow pointing down to see a lot of other options. So let's say, I don't know, I need this like, I don't know, backfill with gray. It's kind of random. Let's find this one. This is a fill. This is a theme in the background. So all of a sudden I have this teal. Maybe the shape fill alone, I'm not happy with that. So I can switch it to different colors, and again, that's where the shape and the themes come in. So just something to really think about. It gets fun. This is almost like embedded PowerPoint, but you could do that right through Excel in this chart design and format tab. Specifically, join me and click on the products chart title. And let's say you're not happy with the way this looks, you want to make it a little bit more fancy and call it out. There's also word art styles, and you can just hover over here and click on it. It'll start changing for you. If you want to be really fancy, again, feel free to hit that arrow pointing down. Here's some pre-built options for you, or you can use these arrows pointing down for text effects, outline, and fill, and you can get real fancy with those. So otherwise, this is where, again, you really dictate the look and feel of your graphic, specifically your chart. And just to recap where we've been going with that is basically we created very specific types of charts and learned to not only play with the layouts, but more importantly, the formatting to visually make it a little bit more appealing. Just some other best practices that I could share with you. When you're working with charts, specifically pie charts, just remember if you want to call a very specific piece, you want to click the piece itself instead of the entire pie. So just something to think about. And then again, always be sure on charts that you select your data first in order to insert your chart. So I did that a little backwards according to this, but again, always sure and select your data first. When you do that, you're able to create the chart or any input from there. And again, just to recap specifically on pie charts, you want to click the pie piece, not the entire pie chart, if you're going to call out a very specific selection. So otherwise, again, that is a recap of what we just did. Had a lot of fun to not only take data, analyze it, but more importantly, learn how to create visual charts, specifically basic charts in all different types of styles. And again, got a lot of chance to play with it. So we're going to take this up a notch, and where this takes us is actually working with other types of charts potentially, but that starts out with tables. And we're going to pick up specifically in our fourth module where we work with pivot tables. We're going to learn how pivot tables behave and how they're created literally from scratch, but learning to pivot them specifically so you can create your own pivot charts. So you start with a table and then you create the chart. Then after that, just like with regular charts, you can also format your pivot chart specifically. And just a high level overview, what pivot tables are, and we'll see this in just a moment, it's the ability to take a lot of data, make sure when we view it, it's a lot more visually friendly, where we can quickly summarize, organize, and more importantly, potentially compare heavy sets of data all in one shot. So we're going to see that shortly. For this particular module, we have two different workbooks. They are labeled 4A and then 4AA. So join me in just a moment on those specific workbooks. So at this time, I take it you've managed to close out your workbooks and successfully open up again our first workbook for Module 4, and that is titled 4A, Excel Level 2, specifically Chapter 4, Pivot 2. I know, kind of lengthy, I'll work on that. But when you open it up, it should look like this. There's basically two tabs, and they're labeled Pivots, which is your raw data, and then you have what's called Sheet 1, and there's a purpose behind this, so this is a little tight to see, so I apologize. I'm going to try and make it so you could see everything all in. And the goal with this particular exercise is to first see how pivot tables behave so that we are ready to eventually build it from scratch. So to check this out, when we talk about pivot tables, remember it's pulling a lot of data but trying to visually put it together so that we can quickly organize and find and drill down very specific data. And for example, when I click on this pivot table, again, this is all the data, and notice there's potentially hundreds of rows and thousands even. So it's just a ton of data. And when we click on the sheet 1, this again is a pivot table. How I know that is when I click on the sheet itself, and technically my mouse was at this 86, like cell D9 basically, but click anywhere on the pivot table, and you'll see, similar to charts at the very top, you have what's called a pivot table analyze tab. So that's specific to pivot tables. It's a type of table. And then you also have a design tab. So again, very similar to the behaviors that we saw with charts just earlier. So what I want to point out in this view, and I'll try to zoom in just a tad bit so we could see this a little bit more. This pivot table on my left is all dictated by the pivot table fields pane on my right. So what I mean by that is in this top half area where there's a checkbox, somehow there's data related to that on the left in the table. Specifically, there's information for customer. So if you look at cell A1, there's customer. We definitely have countries listed in these rows. There's months indicated by these 1 through 12 values indicating the months of the year. And then you have the totals as in column N and row 26. So how is that all being determined at this time? Well, it depends and where in the quadrants of the pivot table. So on the bottom half of this pivot table field on the far right of my screen, this is where you get to decide as the author of these tables, how does it look? And you would simply click and drag fields to the appropriate quadrants below to change quickly how it'll be seen. So for example, I will start here with the filters quadrant, and notice it says customer. That's a very specific category. So because it's a filter, what that means is at the top left in A1, this will behave as a filter. So if I actually scroll into B1, if I pull this arrow down, notice it's by default on all. If I pull the arrow down in B1, this leads to me every single customer. And there are a lot, folks. They are alphabetically ordered, which is really nice. But let's say I want very specific customers. I can unselect the multiple items, and then I can select very specific customers, and the data will update to just that customer. I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to keep it on all. But the point was I can absolutely drill down as I need to be. So I'm going to keep it on all and click OK. Notice the numbers, the data, and all that quickly changed. I don't know if you saw that, but it happened really quickly. So other ways that just to show you how this is currently behaving, in the columns quadrant, we have the category of month. So every single column here, like column B, C, all the way down to M, and if I lose that pane, by the way, I can click the table itself and I'll always like pre-populate it here. There's a couple ways to happen that. But otherwise, because we have the month as a category, specifically under columns, that's why column B is January, column C is February, and so forth. Again, it's not really listed there, but that is how it's outlined. We'll talk about that in a bit. Going down these quadrants, okay, there's a rows quadrant. And specifically, notice we have country below it. So the reason why countries are listed from row 5 through row 25 is because we've selected it to be in country and in the rows quadrant. So that's why it's outlined here specifically as rows with every single country. The last quadrant, known as values, this is where the sum of total appears, and the values are basically where they crosshair. So at this point we have the values in column N as in Nancy, and that's for every single country across the board from January through December. And notice in row 26, I have also a total value, but for all the countries, for example, but in that specific month. So for example, this would be on my left side, all of January for every single country and so forth. Okay, so the point is we will get to determine how this table looks and behaves simply based off of how we set it up in the pivot table fields. And to check that out, we are going to go ahead and close out the current exercise file. No need to save unless you want to. And we're going to build it out from scratch. Before we do, I want to point out just some tips for success specifically with pivot tables. Before you begin pivot tables, in your raw data, you need to absolutely be sure, going back to the concept of friendly neighbors, that there are no blank rows and no blank columns or blank cells. If you do that, your table will not truly reflect all your data. Remember, Excel likes its friendly neighbors, so we'll stop where we don't have a neighbor. So just something to truly think about. So in these next exercises, I've actually done the legwork for you. There are no blanks. Besides that, when we're working with pivot tables, you do want to have what's called column headers. And we'll see that shortly. But the column headers will dictate the categories that you have. So when we saw the customer, the country, the month, those are all officially the column headers. So we're going to see that shortly. And the third tip that I have for you is generally when you work with pivot tables, there's a lot of data. I'm talking thousands, almost to the million row, literally, depending on your organization, and I've seen that. But my point is, because there's just so much data visually, which can be quite overwhelming, generally you will have your pivot table always, almost always, on entirely separate sheets than your raw data. And again, that is conceptually what I shared when we were talking about charts. That generally holds true with pivot tables because there's just so much more data. So again, light bulb moment, just something to think about. So where this takes us, let's get into exercise 4AA, where we begin to create that pivot table from scratch. So for 4AA, this particular exercise, please bear in mind we do have a separate workbook for it. So you want to make sure you opened up 4AA through 4D already. It is a different file than what we just used. So take a moment to make sure you close the previous one out. And when you open it up, you will see there's simply one tab labeled as pivot. And it is your raw data. And it's going to go for a good couple hundreds of rows, to be quite frank. And going back to the points of before you create a pivot table, you need to clean up your data, and that is true conceptually for any type of table. So I've gone ahead and done that for you. There's 0 blanks, 0 columns, etc. that are blanks. So right here in this pivot tab, what you want to do is click anywhere, literally any particular cells, because Excel will recognize its friendly neighbors. So to create the pivot chart itself, okay, we're going to go back up to the Insert tab. And on the left-hand side of the ribbon, there's a Tables group. Again, there's like regular tables or there's other types of tables, and specifically for this module, we're aiming for Pivot Table. So that is the button on the far left. And forgive me, my screenshots probably don't match that because there's already been updates, but just click the button itself. What that would do, it leads you to this pop-up window. If you're not seeing that because maybe you click the arrow pointing down on the pivot table button, that's fine. Again, you're just going to select from table/range because that is the purpose of why we clicked a cell. We have a very specific range of data that we're working with. So when you do that, this is that same pop-up window, and it is floatable. And so where it says select a table or range, this refers to that range of data, and that's why it was pre-selected, so it's already in there. And what we want to do is house the pivot table in its entirely separate sheet. So for this reason, we're going to ensure that we select new worksheets. Once you're ready, go and click on OK. And immediately what should happen is you will see we have a new tab titled Sheet 1. And although the table on the left side is fully blank and it says to build a report, choose fields from the pivot table field list, and that is the pane on my right. So as we saw before, there's nothing selected, which is why I have a blank quote-unquote table on the left. And we are now going to start building that out. So let me just move this right along. We are now into step number 9, if I'm reading this right. Okay, so here we go. Now that we have this sheet 1, remember we now have that pivot table analyze tab and design that was not there previously. Okay, and then now we have this pivot table fields pane on the right, and we're going to build out this table. So as we click on things on the right, I want you to take a moment and observe what happens on the left in the table itself, the pivot table specifically. Once you're ready, join me. We're going to hang out in this far right pivot table fields pane. We want to select 4 specific criteria from these choices, and that's going to be customer. So you want to click on customer until you get the check. When you do that, notice to the left, I get all the customers, a ton of them, okay? Once we click on customer, let's go to month, and that's the time frame. So suddenly I have in column B all the months listed supposedly in numerical order or values. And then we're going to click on total. Total is sum of total, otherwise known as that. And again, we can see the sum overall in a brand new column. Lastly, let's select shipper. And what just happened was shipper's in there, and Excel's over here trying to do its thing. And overall, shipper is in there, but below the customer name. So I could see for this first person, Alfred's, we have Federal Shipping, Speedy, and United, and I could see the timeline with the total amount for that time frame. And what I want to point out is similar to what we observed in the 4A exercise, this is now all collapsible. So again, the intent of pivot table is to take a lot of data and organize it and visually be friendly. Let's say I don't want to see of Alfred's information. I can click on the minus sign. That collapses it, if you will. So notice I have Alfred, but nothing's showing. I just have the overall view, the sums in bold. And I could do the same thing with Anna. I could do the same thing with this third one around the horn. It's very similar. So if you ever want to see more, you'll hit the plus sign again. And I could see again, going back to that original view, all the shippers below the customer name. Okay, so pretty cool off the bat. It's pretty fancy, but visually, is it the best? Yeah, we could do some work. And that's what we're going to try out now. So for this part, we're now going to what's called pivot the data, meaning manipulate where it is so that visually it looks more correct in terms of how we would interpret it. So specifically, here's what I want you to do. What we're going to do is on this right side pivot table fields pane, okay, we've already selected our data at the top. We're now going to work and break down the quadrants. So if you take a look in your view, we saw how shipper, the types of shippers, so Federal, Speedy, and United, are below the customer name. And the reason for that is in the rows quadrants, we have the customer above shipper. So what if we want to reverse that? Maybe this is just too much and we want to go by the shipper. So to do so, you can click, drag, and drop each field into the appropriate quadrant or even update it within the quadrant. So what I mean by this is we're going to click and hold shipper, drag it till it's above customer but still in the rows quadrant. So click and drag shipper, so it's a darker green here. I'm going to hold it down and drag it above customer, so I get these little guide bars. And I'm going to let it go, and in just a moment you're going to see that we're going to see the shipper as the main row, and then below it the customer name. So here we go, and 1, 2, and 3. Whoa, gotta love it. So here we go. Here's your row labels because we're in the row quadrant, and technically this is filterable, so I could pull this arrow down. It's by shipper, but part of the shipper is I can drill down to the customer name. So for example, Federal Shipping, and here's all my customer info. And I can hit this minus sign to see Speedy Express. Also has the customers below because customer again is below the shipper name. And here we go. If I really collapse them all, I can quickly see all my data through that minimizing and collapsing plus sign. So now that we got a chance to play with the rows, we're going to play around with the filter. And as of right now, if you look in your quadrant, filters is empty. So we're going to take the customer from the rows quadrant. We're going to pull that field and drag it all the way up into the filters quadrant. So here we go. Click and drag. We're going to click and hold, the customer field, drag it up into the filters quadrant. We're going to let it go and see what that happens. Woo! All right, here we go. Thanks, Excel. Kind of cool. So what just happened was instead of in the rows, I still see my shippers, but I can use a filtering option to actually identify my customers. And we saw this in the very first exercise, but here's the customer in A1. So filters generally are at the top left corner. And then in the B1 column, I can again, or cell, I'm sorry, select the appropriate customers as in multiple items or all, it just depends. And I'm not going to do much here, but I'm going to click OK. This is simply to observe what is happening. If you really want to test it out, feel free to try under the filtering options of customer. If you unselect all, you can click on your very specific customers. So I'm going to go with just randomly here, folk, okay? And maybe I'm going to go with like Furia. And when I click them both and I click OK, what happens in this total in my pivot table, I will see how they're impacted for just those two customers, but the sum and the sum total, notice those are drastically different than the numbers we saw before. So I'm going to select all, hit OK, and notice it's a totally different and drastically different values, which is the expectation. All right, so other things I want to point out is since we now played with filters, looking in this data, the sum of month, that really doesn't make sense. I mean, if we're looking at months, we kind of want to know chronologically January, February, and so forth. This numerical value is not helping much. So to switch that up, we're actually going to take at the bottom right where it says values, the sum of month, we're going to drag that up into the columns quadrant. So at the bottom right, click on sum of month, hold it down until it's selected, and then drag it up to the columns quadrant, and there you go. So immediately what just changed was I now have every column as a month. So February is the equivalent of 2, March is 3, and so forth. There's ways to change that, but again, the concept here is just learning how to manipulate the data based on these quadrants. Once you do that, okay, this makes a little bit more sense. So I could see, according to my shippers, what happened in each month with the grand total on either the far right or row 8. So if I need to play around this a little bit more, let's say I don't want just shipper now. Instead, maybe I want to quickly find out at the country level. So we are going to take this pivot table field section. We're going to uncheck shipper and instead select country, the second option from the top. And notice because I unselected, there's nothing here because rows is empty. So to make it happy, we're going to click on country at the fields pane, and country suddenly, and this is an Excel default, it went to the rows, and that's why suddenly from rows 5 through 25 I can now see at the country level and chronologically. Now, other things I'll point out, these are full-on numerical values, but what does that translate to? Are they dollars? Is it currency? Is it percentage? I really just don't know. So when you're working with pivot tables, formatting behaves very similar to like charts. What I mean by that is in this values, these totals, maybe I need to know what exactly, again, is my format for that. So to change that up, I can click on the values quadrant, specifically the sum of total. So I'm clicking on that, and I get these more options. Specifically, we're going to click on value field settings. Value field settings. And with that, I get this floating window. I'm going to just put it right here. And this is where you can change up the name. So if sum of total sounds wrong, you could just totally change that to like your world or whatever you need to. I'm going to keep it there just for reference of training, but just know it's customizable. And then you have the two tabs. The first tab is simply the values by, and generally for pivot tables, it's to organize and aggregate totals, so it's generally a sum. But if you need to switch that up and find maybe a maximum, minimum, or etc., you can switch that up here. Specifically, because these are all numbers, I want to format it. So at the bottom left corner of this floating window, there's number format button. Click there, and that takes us to a similar window we've seen before. This is where you can format your numbers, and notice it's on general, but let's say it's truly currency that I'm working with. I want to click on currency, and that way I could see the decimal places, sorry, along with the symbol. So if you're happy with this, you're going to click on OK, and I'm going to close out the box by hitting OK. And notice my pivot table itself has changed up. Every value now has a dollar sign, including my grand totals. Pretty awesome, folks. Yes, I hope you're enjoying yourself, but congratulations, you've successfully built a pivot table from scratch and played around with the data to really manipulate how it looks and feels. Now that we've had a chance to build out our pivot table, where this takes us is into exercise 4C as in Charlie, where we take the data from the table and actually create a pivot chart. And all the behaviors that we've seen earlier in the charts will mirror what we're doing here, but specifically to the pivot table. One thing I'll point out specifically to pivot charts and pivot tables is that whenever you make changes to the data in the, say, pivot table, that will sync up with your pivot charts and vice versa. So if I make changes in my chart, those changes will reflect in the table. And this is what I mean by the top here to really create that chart, but observe how the syncing is taking place. So to do so, okay, if you've clicked outside of everywhere like I am, just feel free to click the chart. The intent behind that is to find the pivot table analyze tab. And what we want to do is create the chart. And remember, just like all the things we saw before, chart should be on its own separate tab. Generally speaking, specifically for pivot tables, they are generally always separate. So I'm going to click on this pivot analyze tab. And then that way in the ribbon bar, let me maximize here. There's in the pivot analyze tab in the ribbon, generally, where did it go? Oh, here we go. In the top right, there's usually a tools section, and you can use the pivot charts. And when you click on this, notice it's going to say insert a pivot chart, but it's tied to the data in this table. And that's perfect. We want that. So we're going to click the pivot chart. And we saw this before. You get all kinds of charts, and this is the default is the cluster according to all the data, column style. So in this case, we're just going to go with what Excel thinks. It's the first one, and again, as a preview, I'll see all the countries listed at the bottom and the numerical values as part of the data legend. So I'm going to click on OK. Notice it embeds directly onto the same tab, which is what we saw so many times with charts. And we're going to move this over. So similar to what we did with charts, a little different here with pivot tables and charts. You have pivot chart analyze tab, which is what we played with. There's suddenly design and then format. So just be sure your chart itself is selected. If this looks a little busy to you, like I think so, we're going to totally fix that up. But let's move it first into its own tab. So first select the chart, and then we're going to go back to this, I'm sorry, which one is it? Here we go. We selected the chart, and we're going to go up to the top of Design tab. In the Design tab at the far right, you have the opportunity to move the chart as in its location. And we will keep it in a separate tab, so go ahead and click that button. We saw this pop up before, so we move the chart and we want to put it in the new sheets. And the new sheet we're going to keep as just say chart 1 to keep it simple. You're going to click OK. And dun 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 dun, here is your beautiful chart. It's kind of overwhelming because there's a ton of data. So as you can see at the bottom, you have all your different countries. There's a lot of numerical values, but they're very different in their range. And you even, as the far right, have your months. So, Excel is trying to help you out. It's just a lot of data. So what we're going to observe now is, now that we've created the pivot chart, is observe how it may change, and specifically the table, how it's impacted, even though you originated from the chart itself. Okay, so to do this, just as that if you're following along, okay, we are going to go up to the Pivot Chart Analyze tab. And the purpose behind this is if you're not seeing this pane on the right, just know you have what's called in the ribbon the field list. If you click there, that will take it away, that will turn it on. Take it away, turn it on. So in the ribbon, I'm clicking on the field list. That simply, again, shows that pane and not. And then the other parts that you should know, so again, just looking at this, it's super busy. We don't want all that. So we're going to go and stick with this pivot chart fields part to the right side pane. Instead of shipper, let's say we want country. So in this case, I've already selected country. I don't know what I did there, so I guess I missed a step, my bad. So if you still have that, feel free to uncheck, but we can keep it on country. And because country is selected, notice here in the bottom half with the quadrants, country is in the axis here. So that's why it's at the very bottom. It's the x-axis. And that's why we have Argentina, Austria, etc. at the very bottom. And that's cool, but let's say it's just a little too much for us and we want to geographically, instead of all the countries, just kind of identify very specific ones, say for like North America or something like that. So this is very small, so let me just kind of maximize here. What I'm referring to is at the bottom left, you have in the chart the country section, okay? And we are going to uncheck them all and select very specific countries. So if you scroll with me, we're going to find, say, Canada, Mexico, and USA. So those three countries. You can also use a search if that's easier. Once you find them, click OK. And even though it looked a little busy, cool, here we go. So we have Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and specifically for each month. So that's it, it drilled it down pretty quickly in the chart. And just to show you the raw data, your pivot chart itself, that was referred to as sheet 1. So sheet 1, remember this was a little different. Here's your three countries that we selected. Notice the rows is at the quadrant of rows, it's under country. That matches our chart. So just again, the chart itself will sync always with the pivot table and vice versa. For this reason, we have the three different countries. Now, this looks a little busy, so if you ask me, it would probably need a little bit more cleanup. You will be the one to really decide that. So other parts that I'll point out, again, let's say you want to switch this up, and this is off the books that I'm doing, but let's say we put the country up in the filters. I don't know why we do that, but feel free to click and drag country up into the filters. So what that means is instead at the bottom in terms of the axes, it's blank, which is what that quadrant reflects. But notice at the top left, I can still see that the very specific countries, the three that we did, are still selected, and this is why the data is reflecting that. So again, just a quick fast way, if you need to keep drilling down to very specific customers, you can even do so in this view. I'm just going to peel things back and pretend like I never did that. So I'm going to pull the country, click and drag back to the axes, and here we go with another view of a pivot chart. Keep in mind, if you want to go so far to really format your charts, this is what we're going to do now in the changing the look of the pivot chart. So to do so, okay, I want you to stick on this chart 1 where we have our graphic, and specifically we're going to check out the design tab so we can look at the very different styles and switch gears to how it looks and feels. And this is going to look very similar to the charts module, which is in essence the same thing. So here we go. I clicked on my pivot chart. Because of that, I have the three tabs at the top, and I want design specifically. When I click on design, notice this is very similar to the charts. I have on the left side the chart elements. Because there's so much more data and we didn't see this on regular charts, you can totally fix up the axes, the title, the data, the bars, the grid lines, and so forth. And again, feel free to test it out on your own. But let's say you're also unhappy with the colors in this cluster chart. You can always still change up the color scheme. When we saw this earlier. And one of my most favorite is the chart styles. Pull this arrow pointing down and you can absolutely switch it really quickly without really working about the formatting. So I just did that through the chart styles. Notice it's a little bit darker gray. I got like my data labels all over the place. That is definitely not visually pretty, but just want to point that out that you can quickly do that through the design tab. So similar to what we saw with charts, we're going to just format quickly. And again, in this case, I just happen to have the data labels on and it went over all my little cluster bars and it is what it is. But join me real quick to try, say, the y-axis because we saw what happens at the bottom axis since country is listed there. Feel free to click one of the numbers. So I'm going to click on, say, like the 35,000. Notice this selects the entire thing, and what I love about this is you can go to the Format tab, and oops, let me maximize here so you can see it more. I'm going to click on 35,000, it selects the data, so what you could do too is right click. This will lead you to more options, and let me just close out these pivot table fields so that you can kind of see it. Pivot chart fields, I'm sorry. And I'm a right clicker, so just to share with you another option instead of going all the way to the top, format, ribbon, etc. We're going to click on format axes. And we saw this with charts, but one of my most favorite things because you can do this all at once. Let's say with the axes options, maybe you want to rotate what it looks like. You could do a lot of here. There's what's called your labels. This is next to the axes. There's high, which is really weird. There's low. I mean, that just changed up the axis completely. And then if you really need to go so far, and it's already in dollar amounts, but if going back to the number button here, this is where you can also still change the formatting. And in this case, we still want currency, but just want to point out where this happens. That's specifically to the axes data. On the right side pane here on the format axes, if you click on the text options, again, this is dark mode, so it makes sense to be light, but the font itself, but maybe it's too small. So I can always switch that up. Here's the colors, here's the fonts, etc. I'm sorry, not font, but just the colors primarily. I can always switch gears. Because this is all selected areas, usually if you hit the home and change the font style, all of this generally is applicable. And here you go, I bolded it, changed it up to Arial, etc. A little bit visually friendlier, but the point is behind this is using the design tab. In the formatting tab specifically, you can absolutely make change so that your story is hopefully reflecting exactly what you want to tell using the data. And because this is specifically a pivot chart, this will always reflect the updates in the sheet of the pivot table. So always just keep that in mind. Otherwise, just to debrief where this is taking us, for the fourth module, we got a chance to really play with pivot tables. Primarily, we saw from the get-go how they behave based on the quadrants. And then we got a chance to actually create the pivot table from scratch, in which we then created a pivot chart. And perhaps you need to go so far as to present that. So we did get to play with that pivot chart, its styles, its design, and really the layout. So just keep that in mind. But the biggest lesson here that I want to really stress is the fact that pivot charts and pivot tables go hand in hand. They do sync with each other. So it's great because you don't have to worry about always updating one or the other because of the true sync. So that, my friends, is Module 4. Give yourselves a pat on the back for making your first pivot table. So now that we finished with the fourth module, we are stretching out to the last phase here of module 5, where we get to not only understand how to create the visuals, but more importantly, when we're ready to present, just some other tips and tricks to really consider when you're in presentation mode. And for this portion, we will have one workbook labeled 5A through 5E on presentation features. And we are going to talk about the do's and the don'ts, how to add images, literally go off the grid, but even add different zebra stripes, I like to call it, and even create your own cell styles. We'll take a look at what that means. So if you have any other workbooks open, go ahead and close it out. We are aiming for, again, the fifth, or I'm sorry, not fifth one, but 5A through 5E. Go and double click that and we will begin. Just a high level overview to see what we'll see in each exercise. The do's and the don'ts really has to do with a lot of the fonts, the colors, the backgrounds, making images so that if you are presenting directly out of Excel, it looks much more presentable and legit, for lack of better words. And then sometimes if you are presenting directly out of Excel, you want to just make it visually appealing. You may not have the time and day to really create a PowerPoint. So there's ways to, again, make Excel look like you're actually delivering your message straight from a PowerPoint, but it's actually Excel. So again, lots of fun stuff here. This portion tends to be a lot of the unspoken rule, but just to put it out there specifically, since in the objectives of Excel 2, level 2 is where you're starting to deliver the story of your data. So join me in the workbook, and when you do, it's going to look like this, where you have multiple tabs for each exercise. And I will actually just keep the workbook open because it makes a little bit more sense. A lot of this sometimes seems to be self-explanatory, but just in case, if you want to practice, every particular sheet in this workbook has the exact exercise listed in a box. So here we go. Join me. We're going to click on the 5A fonts, the do's and the don'ts tab. And this is just a high level overview, so if you actually want to type in column J, you're welcome to do that. I personally am just going to discuss this, but you can absolutely test out your values if you want. So when you're presenting in Excel, and whether it's formal presentation or not, you do want to make sure your font is as hopefully ADA inclusive as possible. You don't generally want to use font that is difficult to read. So for example, this is Calibri, but it's kind of really special. Not a good idea to really put that into any presentation, especially if you're trying to maintain ADA compliance. That would not be acceptable. Moving forth into row 7 and 8, generally, because we are wanting to keep things ADA compliant in general, usually it's the Arial font, okay, and size 12. So usually you don't want to go beyond size 12, but if you really need to, the reason why I say don't is just the fact that it's just really large and you may not have the bandwidth for that or time and day in your Excel sheets. It might just be too big, so now these rows are extra large. So that's row 7 and 8. Going into 12 and 13, specifically because of ADA compliance, if you want to get fancy and really format, again, your charts, your data, etc., not a bad idea, but keep in mind for ADA compliance, you generally have a light background with dark font or vice versa. So when I say do, it should look presentable in that aspect. In row 13, specifically column or cell B13, notice it's dark on dark. We don't want that. That would not be considered ADA compliant. If you really need a triple check, do use the color analyze contraster tool, and that will help you determine if it meets those expectations. But just a general rule of thumb, dark mode is fun, but please make sure your font reflects that and you turn that maybe into light or vice versa. The last part here in row 17 and 18, and this might be explanatory, but when you type in a word, you generally don't want the word to go over the cell line. So in row 18, you can see dictionary kind of overextends. If that ever happens, because normally you're not just going to have a single word, it might be like a full on paragraph, just take a moment to wrap the text, meaning in the home tab, alignment, wrap text. That means dictionary would be wrapped around. I'm not losing it. So this is, again, generally, this is probably not the best example visually, but generally you have a full on paragraph or sentence. You want to try and wrap that text and not let it drag on across the different cells. Okay, so feel free to try that out. That's 5A for you, and you can read the exact instructions to the T here on the right if need be, but just from a high level overview, you can practice that into column J. As we move forward, we're going to move into exercise 5B, where we get to learn how, although this is Excel, which is known generally for just data and numbers, that doesn't mean it can't be visually appealing. And what I mean by that is let's add images. There may be times you're creating your chart, you're creating, whatever you got to do in Excel, but you don't have the bandwidth to really create a full-on PowerPoint. And if just because you're maybe presenting the sheet doesn't mean you can't have images. So to add images, for example, and the instructions are right here to the far right, but feel free to join at the very top tab. We're going to click on the Insert tab. And once you click on the Insert tab, similar to PowerPoint and Word, there's an Illustrations group. We want to find the pictures. And when you find pictures, there's three options, either from your local computer, this device. Is it stock images or online? Have some fun with me by clicking stock images. And there's a bunch of categories. Feel free to find one that's pleasing to you. I'm going to go with, say, like animal. And hey, here's a cutie. Okay, so I'm going to select the dog. If it's how I know it's selected is a little check in green, and I'm going to hit the insert button at the bottom right. So once I did that, and here it is, kind of really large, so my bad. I'm not saying randomly put a dog in there, of course, but the point is maybe you need to plug in the HCD logo or something a little bit more legit. And again, just because the picture's in there, you can absolutely resize it. You can have some fun with it. So again, it just keeps it nice and tidy when you're talking about maybe some just additional presentation features that not a lot of people think about. Other things that you can do to make it visually appealing, and again, this is in the condition that maybe you couldn't create a PowerPoint and embed your, chart into it. Let's go on into exercise 5C, where we're talking about going off the grid. And you will obviously shock, maybe floor your managers with this, so you'd be surprised. But what I mean to say by going off the grid is literally nobody wants to see all these extra grid lines in the background. What if you are truly presenting straight out of Excel? We don't need to see those grid lines. So to quickly turn them off, simply go up to your View tab. And generally in the very center, you have the Show group, and by default, grid lines is usually turned on along with your formula bar and headings. Feel free to check out what happens if you turn off the grid lines, and notice automatically there are no grid lines whatsoever, just whatever I plugged in. So that might be a great way visually to capture your audience's attention if you are simply presenting directly out of Excel. And if you want to really get fancy, but no need for this full-on formula bar, you can uncheck that, and technically the formula bar goes away. If you need to get super fancy, there's an arrow at the top right of the ribbon, and you can actually hide it. So I'm going to put this up, and it's like I'm actually presenting. You can't really tell it's really Excel other than the top. So just some quick, fun, fast ways that you could do things, and so that visually, if you are presenting directly from Excel, looks a little bit more legit and appealing to the eye. Now I'm very focused, for example, on just the picture, or maybe even, the table or something. So let's take this up a notch. Let's talk about zebra stripes. And we're going to click on 5D, as in dog. And what I mean by zebra stripes, I'm going to zoom in just a tad bit. So this here's a table. How I know if I click anywhere in the data, suddenly I get what's called the Table Design tab. And this looks pretty cool. Here's that north, south, east, west, right, by the different months. And looks all right, but if you want to get fancier into it, feel free to click on the Table Design tab. And the zebra stripes, what that's referring to is maybe I can, through every other row, input a color. So in this table style options, it's what's called banded rows. And if I click there, notice it says even rows are formatted differently from odd. So if I click the banded rows, suddenly I have the darker shaded blue, I guess, in the background versus white. It might make it a little bit more visually appealing. If you're not happy with banded rows, you can always uncheck that. And you can go with maybe first column, it bolds it, there's last column, and so forth. So you can totally play around with this. You can even go so far as what's called banded columns, where the columns now are differentiated with the zebra lines. So it's pretty fun, if you ask me. I'm going to uncheck that just for reference. And because I'm on this specific table, to the right in the table styles group, again, you can quickly format just through buttons, the look and the feel and the colors. So have some fun with this. I personally would recommend click the arrow pointing down so you can see everything. And now you can really have some fun and format your table accordingly. And hopefully that meets your needs. So that's what I mean specifically through the zebra stripes. For example, here it's in banded rows. Next, we're going to check out 5E, where you get to create your own cell style. And this here is where you're really owning Excel. I personally recommend it if you have a lot of formatting to do across your different sheets. So what I mean by that is, notice at the top here in rows 1 through 4, I have the ability to say if I really like this blue fill with bold blue fonts, in just a button, I can create this style. Or in row 3, if I like this purple on pink, or in row 4, this orange and red, I can completely do that in buttons. So here's what I mean. You're going to join me, and anywhere in row 10, as in B10 specifically, feel free to click there. And your goal is to create as many styles as you need. We're going to just try this once in respect to your time. And again, the exact instructions are here on the right side if you need to really read through it, but we're going to do it together. So I'm selecting and clicking on cell B10, and we're just going to type in a random word. The random word is, I don't know, autumn. And you can plug in hello, you can plug in your name, whatever you prefer, as long as you get something in there. So once you do that, right, this is pretty straightforward. It's Calibri 11, etc. We want to style this according to what we want. So in this case, feel free to select the data or that specific cell, and feel free to change the font. I'm going to find them randomly here. I'm going to change also the font size. So this one's like clearly extra large. I'm going to bold it even more. I'm going to italicize it, maybe even underline it. I'm going to give it a beautiful bold border. And let's change up the background. Let's go with like, I don't know, something extra bold. So this bright yellow, not that I would personally do that, but just for training purposes to call it out. And then I'm going to with like a royal blue font, something hopefully a little bit complimentary. So basically what I was just doing is clearly formatting a very specific cell. And what if you have a bunch of cells that you want this exact style, but now you got to select all the cells, go to yellow, go to bold, etc. That's cool, but that might be a lot of legwork. So I'm going to share with you how everything, the properties of what you selected, can turn into your specific cell style. So what I mean by that is click the cell that you started this on. So in my case, it is B10. And we're going to go up to the top here. We're going to stay in the Home tab, but specifically there's a Styles group. You're going to click the arrow pointing down. And once we get a view that looks like this, we're going to go out towards the bottom and select New Cell Style. So what that means is in this floating style box, it's going to inherit all the properties. So the numbers, the alignment, how the font is, what the border is, if they're shaded, and so forth. And you get to call it your own style name. So I'm going to go and label it as, let me be creative here. Bethany's World. I don't know. Let's see if it takes that. Once I'm ready, and let's say, I don't know, you forgot something, there's still a formatting button so you can still add to the pot, but right now we'll say we're happy with it. So I'm going to say okay. And once I do that, what happens is immediately in my styles group, here is my name. I'm hovering over it as Bethany's World. That's the style. So that means it's going to have that yellow background, bold blue, etc. So let's say I have a bunch of words. I'm going to say just, let's see here. Monday, I'm typing in a random cells here, Tuesday, and then I'm going to tab over and go to like Wednesday. And instead of going maybe column by column, cell by cell, I can make this all a quick, fast style through a button. So I'm going to select the text or the cells that I want to be impacted. And I'm going to go up to the top in the styles group and simply select mine. And notice, because I had extra large font, it did it automatically for me. I'm just going to maximize these columns here so you could see it. But notice within just a second, literally, I was able to update Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, what I originally typed in, through my very specific personal style. And I gotta tell you, it's one of my most favorite things about this. It is your personal style. So feel free to love it and own it. And that wraps up the exercise for 5E, where we created our own cell style. By the way, if you ever want to get rid of that, if you just hit the arrow pointing down, you'll be able to just right click over it. You can even apply, modify, or even duplicate or delete. Delete obviously would mean you're going to trash it and get rid of it. And if that's your goal, go for it. So otherwise, what I wanted to share with you, we're going to debrief what just happened here. We took a look at the do's and the don'ts, figured out to make a presentation directly out of Excel, much more presentable through images, taking off the grid lines, using zebra stripes, and really just using even your own personal cell style. Got a chance to do all of that. So where this takes us, folks, is as a full-on recap, we wrapped up a lot of items here within the 5th module where we kind of put the bow on it and made it look hopefully really good, because the goal is in Excel level 2 primarily is not just playing with the data, using advanced functions, but more importantly, sharing your story so that it's visually appealing and that you're able to hopefully engage your audience. So through all these tips and tricks, feel free to try that. Let me know how it goes. But where this takes us is I just want to say this now concludes all the different objectives that we were hoping to accomplish for Excel Level 2, where we got a chance to play with advanced calculations, specifically name ranges and multiple worksheet calculations. We then moved along the roadmap here into even more functions, specifically if function, database functions, and VLOOKUP. As we worked with that and the data, we then learned how to create basic charts, whether it's anywhere from a cluster chart, line chart, and so forth, and especially pie charts. And that went hand in hand with pivot tables and pivot charts to the point where, regardless of the chart style and so forth, you got a chance to hopefully really play with the design section and the formatting section. So otherwise, in the handout, you're more than welcome on your own time to check out other tips and tricks on how to just customize your Excel software as in your environment to hopefully something that's more appealing to your specific needs and hopefully will make you more proficient and satisfactory with your setup of Excel. Other than that, folks, I do want to say thank you. If you do have questions, perhaps you have comments and you really are wanting to emotionally share your thoughts, feel free to have that outburst directly with me. Again, my name is Bethany. I'm a training officer here at HCD, and I want to leave you with hashtag happy excelling. If you do need me, my email is up on the board here. And otherwise, we'll see you on the next one. Have a great rest of your day.